Hey, deserving listeners. Today's episode is a call-in with Collin. If you remember from previous installments of this series, it is with Collin Miller, who is a very smart, articulate person about really all things, but particularly about art and movies. He's a screenwriter, director, theater guy, and has a lot of interesting things to say about movies. I have already recorded an episode, or at least a segment of an episode, where I just kind of randomly yammered about movies and TV that I've watched in the past year. But I wanted to do a different sort of yammering today of talking about the Oscars, which are coming up, or actually by the time this episode airs, the Oscars would have already happened. So know that right now we're the week before the Oscars. I also just want to talk with Collin about his take on movies in general, but also movies that he's seen from the past year. Also, I want to try to comment on the psychological angle of a lot of these movies, of which some of them might be a little surprising that we can even have that conversation, because some movies and TV don't really have that explicit angle. But anyway, welcome to the podcast, Collin.
Well, thank you so much. Yeah, it's always great to hear your voice and talk nerd out, I shall say. This has been a very interesting year for film, because one thing I've noticed is that there's a real drive, even at the quote-unquote prestige film level, to reach general audiences, to get them into the theater, get them to put their phone down, and also to get them really excited about the Oscars. I've actually seen a lot more discourse around the Oscars this year than I did previous years. So it's a unique time where I feel like people are extra excited about movies, but they're also extra ready to be hateful about movies. So it's like, as politics are hyperbolizing, so are sort of our general perceptions of large-scale media, which is an interesting landscape to navigate as someone who likes to talk about it in a critical way.
What have you seen regarding movies that are seemingly more packaged for general audiences? What specific movies?
So one that recently came out, it's actually probably a 26. It's hard to tell for me unless I have it right in my hand, given the way that things are distributed now when they're on streaming, if they were in another country first. Like Pillion was out in Europe for months and months and then finally came here. So I'll talk about Wuthering Heights. Wuthering Heights is obviously a very complicated novel. It's a classic. It's got a lot of strange family dynamics, to say the least, and it's definitely a tragedy. It's definitely a very creepy story. It's not one that I would say is all that romantic, although there's an interesting dynamic between the main character and Heathcliff, Kathy and Heathcliff. I read it when I was in high school. I don't remember that much about the book, but the movie is very different. It's by Emerald Fennell, and it's sort of a Moulin Rouge as done by Baz Luhrmann, hyper stylized, with anachronistic music and costumes and sets that are really hyper stylized and over the top. And one thing that was fascinating is that a lot of people were really into it, because the movie took out all the messiness of the book and made it just a very digestible, if not bizarrely erotic love story with some strange dynamics still, but certainly less fraught with class drama as it was in the book, so that a general audience could really take it in without having to think about the greater themes of the novel. And the conversation around it, from not just book purists, but also people who saw it and enjoyed that it was a little more of a simplified take, or people that said it was a complete discredit to movies in general, even if they didn't know the book. They were saying, this is too simple, this is too watered down, just so that we'll all like it. It's like we can feel that they're manipulating us, trying to get us in with all this glamour, that's very, very surface level. I found myself somewhere in the middle, where I went, I see what this film is doing, kind of like Kiss of the Spider Woman. It's not as nuanced as the book that came out, as the movie that came out like 30 years ago. With William Hurt, it's a lot more focused on making the core things about the characters stand out, so all the nuance is sort of lost a little bit. And of course, it's a musical. There's a lot more music, and Jennifer Lopez is dancing around in very stylized makeup. So people, again, that was definitely a 2025 film. People were talking about the simplification of that film and the complex political drama that was in the original movie that is present to some degree in this new one, but super, super simplified. And so I've found that people have taken sides. Like, it's okay that these filmmakers are simplifying things for a general audience and just doing what they want to do visually. And then other people are definitely disagreeing and saying, no, like, source material matters. Or if they don't know the source material, nuance matters, complexity matters. Stop trying to manipulate us. So that's where I think the dialogue is as I assess it.
Interesting. How many stars out of 10 would you give it?
Well, for Kiss of the Spider Woman, I would give it probably a 4, and I originally on Letterboxd gave Wuthering Heights a 4, but I would actually take it down a half and do a 3.5, because when I'm watching a movie, I very much want to watch what the director wants me to watch. So I'm going to try my very best to go, you know what? This may not be what my expectation was. I might have done things differently, but do I really get what the director is doing? And on that level, I suppose I appreciated, when we talk about those two movies, I appreciated the production value. I appreciated how streamlined things were. I do like a movie that moves, even if it's a very slow pace. I like a well-paced film. So all those things, it would just depend on the degrees upon which I got it, because, like, I recently saw Scream 7, and it was just too far. To me, the simplification, the welcome general audience, turn your brain off, I think sometimes you can dial that down so far, and I feel that ick factor with stuff like Scream 7, where it's not really what was best for the story. It was all the stuff they felt like they had to put in it because that's what the audiences were expecting. And that's what the people who might be on TikTok or Instagram or Twitter or whatever it's called now while the movie is going on, this will be good for them because they won't miss anything if they look down and then look up. And whenever I catch wind of that, that's when I turn off. That's what turns me off, because I think a director should have faith in their audience to watch the film from start to finish without getting distracted. And so Scream 7 and others like it have pushed the argument in, I would say, more extreme directions, where we're actually having to consider what is a movie anymore. Just because it's released in theaters, does it have all the components that make a movie a movie? Does it follow basic rules of screenwriting? Are there characters? Is there a protagonist? You can just see some of this studio stuff and you go, I don't know. I mean, yeah, it's a movie I'm seeing in a movie theater, but they're not playing by the rules.
Well, I think what you might be saying is, if I'm hearing you right, is that it's not necessarily a movie as much as it is content, in quotes, that is being created to just have another thing on the screen, whether it's Scream 7 or doom scrolling on TikTok or a random YouTube video. These streaming platforms that are often funding these movies, they might not necessarily care if it really fits the format of a movie. They're just trying to keep you, streaming the channel or streaming that platform so that you pay for it, right? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it's pretty disturbing, because there are things like, for example, I think two of my favorite films ever, which I tend to lump together as one because it's in volumes. I love Kill Bill 1 and 2. A lot of people, I feel like it's a polarizing Tarantino. People either love it in the Tarantino library or they think it's one of the worst. I love it. and they re-released it, the whole bloody affair. I stayed through, because anytime I watch a Tarantino film, I always watch all the credits. I try to do that for most films, but I always do it for Tarantino. And not because, I'm going to see Thanos at the end going, I'm coming soon. It's just, I think he always makes every single aspect of his movies interesting, even the credits. So I'm waiting there to the end of the credits, and then they show an ad slash movie slash short movie, I should say, that is animated and meant to be an advertisement for Fortnite. So part of what went into this re-release of the film was actually a pass that you can get on Fortnite, which is a popular online shooter slash other things game, where you can play as Uma Thurman and other characters in that game. And it wasn't that I was so appalled or anything. It didn't make me angry, but it just honestly made me a little sad. Like, is that what this is in service of? Is Scream 7 only in existence because I need to walk by the popcorn and see 5 different popcorn buckets with Ghostface or a phone or a knife? Is that what all this has become? I know that's been an aspect of movies for many, many years, even before I was alive. But I think it's the expansion of this need to sell things outside of the movie itself that is like pushing big budget movies to a kind of breaking point. And that's the sad.
Yeah, it's fucking ridiculous. What is the Venn diagram of weirdos who like Kill Bill 1 and 2? No offense, just joking. And people who play fucking Fortnite, what 15-year-old, and I know adults play Fortnite is fine, but the vast majority are, skewing younger. And I'm just going to take a guess and say that 1, they're not watching Kill Bill 1 and 2, and 2, they're not sticking around to the end. It's disgusting. Some people are like, oh, what's the big deal? If you went to a Vincent van Gogh, which I think films, and Quentin Tarantino films included, are in the same class of, if you went to a Vincent van Gogh exhibit, and there will be a whole theme, right? It's not just a corner of the art gallery. It's a whole exhibit. It's a whole set of rooms it's kind of like an altar, because that's the way it feels. That's the way it is. That's the way it should be treated. And if you had a Fortnite QR code next to one of the paintings and you could play as Vincent van Gogh on Fortnite or something, I think most of us would understand that's disgusting. And to put that at the end of, put it at the end of Scream 7, fine. But the reissue of Kill Bill 1 and 2, if it was there originally and for whatever reason Quentin Tarantino decided to sell out, like, okay, but to add it on, because Quentin Tarantino's not a fan of that, right? But someone else owns the distribution rights or something, and yeah, that's fucking disgusting. And, they can do what they're. I'm not going to cancel them or anything, but yeah. Plus, it's so pointless, right? Because it's at the end of the. Who? I would be surprised if a single human being was, in the market who happened to come across that ending screen. It's just ridiculous. And for the record, I go back and forth about Kill Bill 1 and 2, and more recently it's on the uptick with me. I will watch scenes on YouTube and stuff like that. Yeah. But yeah, it's not at the top of my list of Quentin Tarantino movies, but they kind of shift over time. Anyway, would it have been more effective to just make, instead of adapting Wuthering Heights, just make a completely different IP, if you will, if they were wanting to, make a movie that was so different from the book, then why not just change the names and the setting or something and just have a story that isn't connected to the book, and then you don't bother anybody. But then you don't get the cachet of all the book fans, at the very least, making publicity as they're talking about how shit, what I haven't seen Wuthering Heights, but would it have been more wise just to make a standalone movie that wasn't connected to the book?
Absolutely, because then you could just do what you want to do as the creator. You don't have to think about, oh, well, would Bronte have done this? You can just quiet that and go, because I got it. I was watching it going, this is how Emerald felt while she was reading this book. And this is what I'm experiencing. Her journey through the book, not the book itself. So I got it, but at the same time, just use that journey and hire a writer. You have all the tools at your disposal. She's very well connected in England and beyond. She could have hired a writer if she's not a writer herself, and she could tell them exactly what she wants. I really love this book. It meant a lot to me when I read it. You know, I envisioned this thing that wasn't the thing, but then the thing meant more to me when I envisioned it differently, and then just make that movie. You are absolutely 100% correct. But the problem is you can look at a trend in not even just years and years ago. I went down a real rabbit hole about this. I went all the way back to 2015 because of all the stuff happening around James Bond right now. And I was thinking about the use of names, because in that movie, Spectre, why did we have to go back to in 2015 when Daniel Craig is still James Bond and everyone's fairly on board for more James Bond adventures? There's no legal issues, I don't think. I think the writer's strike was a few years earlier with Quantum Solace. Why did we need Blofeld and Spectre again? And the whole... And I don't think it was them, like, I don't think Barbara Broccoli, the producer, was like, you know, I'm so inspired right now. I really, really need to bring Blofeld back into the mix. A villain that we had, I don't know, 15 years ago. We last saw on For Your Eyes Only. We gotta have him back. That's objectively not true, and I doubt she really wanted it. But this is where studio pressure comes in, but you're going to need to set up the Spectre show, because we're going to need something for Q and Moneypenny in the spinoff for Q and Moneypenny to have on this platform. And now, fast forward 10 years, Daniel Craig has since left. We probably got 1.5 less James Bond movies than we might have, because those movies in the past were produced fairly quickly. And now it's Amazon basically pushing Barbara Broccoli out of it, as Disney did to George Lucas a few years ago with Star Wars. And now, and the whole reason they did that is she said, I don't want to treat James Bond like content. We'd already been pressured to do stuff like this, and you're talking about all this spin-off stuff and, you know, the MI6 expanded universe, and we want Bond to be event movies. And if we do all this, it's going to dilute it. It's going to be hard. And then I think Bezos basically was like, I don't care how much money it takes, get rid of her. And that's sort of the depressing moment that we're in, which is billionaires are trying to own art, not because they really want it, but because they can. And it's another way that they can monopolize something that ought to not be monopolized. So,
yeah, I think it all just comes down to the writing. And often the writing is just so atrocious, like with Game of Thrones, House of the Dragon, and Knight of the Seven Kingdoms. And I'm a super fan of the whole A Song of Ice and Fire universe. And I don't hate season 8 of Game of Thrones as much as everyone else does, because I've read the book so many times and had problems with the books even before the TV show started. I was yelling as I'm reading the book to George Martin, just like, will you trim this story down? You only have 2 more books to go. You know, so I don't envy the showrunners for trying to wrap up the story. It was a disaster, but I think best case scenario, I don't think it would have been that much better. House of the Dragon, I love. I know some people don't like it. I know George R. R. Martin doesn't like the second season. I love the second season. There are some goofy moments, but it is perfect for me. A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, also perfect. Too short, way too short. It's just like 6 episodes, 30 minutes each. But Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, I've already watched it like 3 or 4 times, and it just came out. So in that same way, you have, you know, the expanded Game of Thrones universe, but at the head of each show, you have competent showrunners and writers. With James Bond, you know, it all depends on that. I don't think, if I were to put money down on something, I would say that they don't get the right writers for it, because honestly, the last number of movies were, I don't know, they just lacked. You know, that first one with Daniel Craig was great, but the other ones, I'm like, and I'm a huge James Bond nerd, so And I'm okay with the shifting tone because, if you are a James Bond fan, you're used to changing tones through the decades,
That's the whole
and
thing.
it was a fresh kind of thing. And so I was into it. But yeah, the Blofeld stuff, the Spectre stuff, it's member berries, right?
Right.
And with the more recent MCU movies, the dilution of the brand, yeah. But if you had competent, like with Star Wars, it's a classic example. The same thing was happening with Star Wars, right? And Kathleen Kennedy and Disney and the expansion, multiple movies and TV shows. And it started to look pretty bad. But when you have a good showrunner, like with Andor, then, showrunner and writer, then it doesn't matter that the brand is being diluted. If at the leadership level and in the writing room, you have competent people. So, when it comes to Jeff Bezos, like with Rings of Power, Lord of the Rings, I mean, I so badly wanted to like that TV show, and it is so goofy on so many levels. I'm okay with Galadriel being a badass because that is essentially the lore. But the writing, but now I will say that there were scenes during Rings of Power where I cried because I'm seeing things that are happening that I had only imagined in my head from the Silmarillion and stuff, and I'm like, oh, this is so great to see Elrond and is it Durin that are friends anyway, and to see that happen in front of me, it's just like, oh, I'm crying. But then, smash cut to the next scene, and I'm just like outward laughing at how goofy the scene is. And if Rings of Power had competent writers at the helm, I think it would be completely different. So, we'll just have to see what happens with James Bond. Yeah. But let's take a break. When we get back, let's complain about other things after the break. What do you say?
Sounds perfect.
All right, we're back from the break. So let's switch gears for a second and talk about the Oscars, which occurred last weekend, if I'm correct on when this episode is coming out. But anyway, let's review the 10 Best Picture nominations and just go one by one. Bugonia, have you seen it?
I did, yes.
What did you think of it?
I enjoyed it. I was mixed on the ending, no pun intended. And I was weirded out, to be honest, that the Oscars did not nominate Jesse Plemons, because I was thoroughly creeped out, and I like a movie that keeps me on my toes. And for a while, without spoiling it, it's very much set up of, is it in the person's head? Is it something that or is it actually happening? Or what's happening? Is it him? Is it her? Is it them? It's a really unique film. I like Yorgos Lanthimos in general. It's not my favorite of his films, but sure, definitely throw it in the mix. Let's give it its nose.
I guess fittingly, my favorite Yorgos Lanthimos movie is The Favorite. The movie called The Favorite.
That's a great one.
I mean, I always have a soft spot in my heart for Lobster because that was the first one I think I've seen of his movies. But I liked Bugonia. I think I gave it what I give it, a 7 out of 10. And I agree about the ending. We won't spoil it, but
right.
About halfway through the movie, I was like, oh, this will be interesting if they never answer the question. Because it's not a spoiler to say that the whole movie is centering around this guy who seemingly has a wacky conspiracy theory that he adheres to, and he abducts this executive played by Emma Stone, and Jesse Plemons is the conspiracy theory guy, and Jesse Plemons is accusing Emma Stone for being an alien essentially, and it just sounds ridiculous, but at a certain point you're just like, well, we are in Lanthimos territory, so maybe there is some truth to this conspiracy theory. We don't know, but spoiler at the end, they start kind of locking down an answer to that question. The way that I interpreted it, and I'm again trying to avoid spoiling it, is that one could argue that past a certain point in the movie, it is no longer connected to reality. You could make the argument that everything that happens past a certain point is quote unquote in someone's head, or happens in the last second of their life or something, you know? So I kind of choose to live in that zone, but I agree. It would have been a stronger movie if it didn't have that. It would have pissed a lot of people off, though. I find that people like you and me, Colin, are rare in this respect, that, 95% of the audience would, hate Lanthimos and Will Tracy and Zhang Ju Huan, who are the writers, for if they didn't tell us at the end what was true and what wasn't. People don't like at the end of Sopranos, right? When it just goes to black. I love that and loved it at the time. I'm frustrated by it, sure, but what's the alternative? That we see exactly what happened. People consume art for different reasons, and I'm not like a fan of purposely screwing with the audience and withholding information, but there are instances where the experience of that frustration is the art, and to just, cohere the story into a particular reality, it kind of ruins it. But that's the last, 5 minutes of the movie, really. And so the rest of it, I gave a 7 out of 10. How many stars would you give it?
I gave it 3.5. I'd probably give it 4 upon rewatch. So
out of 10 or 5?
Oh, I'm just doing 5. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So you're saying 4 or 3.5 out of 5 for Wuthering Heights. I see.
Yeah.
Because I was like, I thought Colin was talking like he liked Wuthering Heights, but 3.5, that's pretty fucking low out of 10. I see. Okay. Next movie, F1. Have you seen Brad Pitt and his F1 movie?
I did, and I quite enjoyed. I think he's good in it. I really walked away enjoying Damson Idris as the rival. I think he's a great up-and-coming movie star, and I felt the way one might have felt watching, Tom Cruise and Val Kilmer in the original Top Gun, watching these, or even more recently in Top Gun Maverick, which obviously has some stylistic similities for obvious reasons.
Written and directed by the same guy.
Exactly. The same people. Yeah. They have a great eye for new talent, and I think that was my favorite thing about it, in addition to the sound design. I really liked the sound design. So.
I fucking hated this movie. I gave it a 1 out of 10. I thought it was the cheesiest, dumbest. I liked Top Gun Maverick. It's also pretty cheesy and goofy, Top Gun Maverick, but I found the writing to be far superior. Like, I remember with Top Gun Maverick, like about, 10, 20 minutes into the movie, as they're reintroducing us to the whole storyline, and you have old Tom Cruise coming back to the Air Force or Navy base or whatever, and he meets all the young pilots in the bar. And that whole scene, I remember thinking, this is perfectly written. In fact, you and I might have even talked about it on an episode years ago about this, that it was one of those moments where I was like, wait, am I enjoying this like a lot? And then I thought, wait, what's happening? And I thought, oh, they just introduced about 7 new people and reintroduced us to Tom Cruise in this later stage. And they did it so efficiently. And I now know all of those people. And now we can move forward with the story because each character has been defined. The relationships have been defined. No one's a cartoon, although it's a little cartoonish because, it's Top Gun, but it's not absurd. And people, myself included, that aren't necessarily critiquing the movie are not noticing that they did that, all while making it interesting. Whereas with F1, I still don't know who fucking Brad Pitt is. All he is just an old guy who is, pulled out of retirement, in quote. If I thought 20 minutes into the movie, I thought, is this an SNL sketch? Because this is a parody of these kinds of movies. Brad Pitt is, this genius racer, and the super billionaire finds him, and they do that stupid ass trope that needs to like die in the 80s, where the rich guy finds Brad Pitt in a laundromat and says like, "Hey pal, you're going to have to come with me." And then Brad Pitt's like, "What are you talking about? You got to get off my back." And then they're like, "Oh, you son of a bitch." And then they hug. You know, he literally says, "You son of a bitch." This is what you would write in an SNL sketch if you were making fun of F1. And then there's a line where Brad Pitt is like upset at, you know, the young Idris character. And he's like, "You're so fucking stupid." Like, it's some sort of line. And then it's supposed to be kind of progressive in that they have two women that are in the racing team, right? And not only are they incompetent, you know, written as incompetent, but Brad Pitt comes along and basically, with almost no effort, does their job for them, fixes everything.
Yeah.
And there are real women who work in F1 and drive F1. So it's not like you're completely taking a risk by having women in the driver's seat and behind the scenes in F1. So, you know, that was fucking annoying. And Brad Pitt, you know, has sex with her, of course, even though at first she's just like, "No, I'm not gonna have sex. You know, I don't have sex with people on the team." And then, of course, without any personality from Brad Pitt's character, by the way, she just automatically loves him because that's just the way things are. Just everything about this movie, you know, the way that they were doing the racing. I don't know that much about F1. I know a little bit, but not very much. And even I was like, no, that's not, you can't do that. You can't, as a racer, break all these rules and ever race again. He was in one race, he did 3 or 4 things that would get you disqualified from ever being in F1 ever again. And the announcers who are announcing maybe the TV broadcast or to the crowd, I couldn't tell. They're focusing on Brad Pitt and his teammate, you know, Idris, even though they're in last fucking place. If you ever watch any kind of racing show, you know, any kind of racing sport, the last place person is not talked about. In fact, the 5th place person is not talked. You're only talking about the leaders, especially if there's no story there, right? If they've always sucked, this team, and the announcers are like going crazy about these two, you know, guys that are at the end of the race. That, you know, we're talking about last place and second to last place, and the guys talking, "Oh, they're taking over each other," and who's gonna? Who? No one cares. Everyone's gone home because the winners have already crossed the finish line. The announcers throughout the entire movie, Brad Pitt would be in 12th place, and the announcers are only talking about Pitt. "Oh, he just no." That would never happen. I was thinking as I'm watching the movie, I'm like, there's a way you can write that, you know, because in the movie, we're trying to focus on the lead characters, Brad Pitt and Idris. And you can do it, but you can't have the announcers talking about him because they would never do that. What you could do is you could have like a room of press where there's various different people, maybe like a podcaster or a YouTuber or something who's like particularly obsessed with Brad Pitt's character, you know, and that person is breaking from everyone else, focusing on the top 15 racers. And this guy's just like, "Oh, I'm just really obsessed with the Brad Pitt story." And, you know, there's a story there, you know, and then of course they have to have the evil, you know, board member who has all the money, and Brad Pitt literally gives him the middle finger. And I mean, the whole thing. So yeah, I am in the minority because a lot of the critics, and I watch like a dozen different critics on YouTube, and every single one of them, you know, Mark Commode, these people. Is that how you pronounce his name? Mark, the English guy? Anyway.
You know, I don't know, but I do watch his videos.
Yeah. Kermode, maybe. Anyway. I watched, after I watched F1, I instantly was trying to find validation for how much I fucking hated this movie. And across the board, even the F1 subreddit people, which you would think would hate this movie, even they mostly liked it. You know, people were like, "It's a fun popcorn movie." To me, it wasn't even that. And I went into this movie thinking that it wasn't going to be a masterpiece, but I was thinking it'll be good. You know, like Top Gun Maverick, maybe not as good as that, but you know, and it's fucking nominated for the best picture.
No, that's ridiculous.
And so, you know, but even if it wasn't, I just, there were so many, every line, so I don't understand. And there are times when I No one agrees with me. Like The
I agree with
Lighthouse.
you to. I will say I do agree with you to an extent. I did not. I gave it a 2 out of 5, and only for the technical aspects of it. I did not like the script. I thought there were so many holes in logic, and I also think one thing that was really important to Top Gun, not only just having a relationship that you're kind of rooting for, like you sort of want Tom Cruise and Jennifer Connelly to get together because they have such chemistry, and it's this beautiful thing that they're moving on from this past and finding each other again. I really thought that worked on a Hollywood movie level, and I at no point was rooting for any relationship in this film, not even really the friendship between Brad Pitt or his rival. You just don't care. And one thing that it was lacking, but it also lacked real stakes. Something that helps Top Gun Maverick be as successful as it is, I think, is that there's actually something worth fighting for. They give you okay, we know exactly what will happen if they do not succeed. People can die. And I know that there is some threat to health and safety in F1, but not in a way that is as accessible to a movie audience as it was in Top Gun. And
Yeah,
there's also
but also, sorry for interrupting. In F1, you could have written a reason for us to root for them, but they purposely did not include that. That's an obvious screenwriting tenet that, at least with the lead characters, you want to hook the audience. And there are cheesy examples of this, like Brad Pitt has a dying mom in the hospital or something, or the younger driver has a bone to pick for racism or something, but they don't include any of that. If anything, they go against it because Brad Pitt from the beginning does not care about money. He is adamant about not caring about money. He doesn't care about his contract. He turns down money regularly throughout the movie, so it's not money. He also does not give a shit about winning. He repeatedly talks about that. The younger guy seems to be only motivated. The story they tell us throughout the beginning of the movie is, and they don't really correct for this, is that he's only interested in fame. He isn't really interested. We don't get the sense that the younger driver is really interested in the art form, so to speak, of F1 racing. He has a manager that we're supposed to like, by the way, who is his social media manager, but at the same time, we're supposed to hate this guy because Brad Pitt comes along and literally tells the young driver to put his phone down. I mean, this was Gen Xers, watching this would be like, yeah, you got to put your phone. I mean, literally Brad Pitt sees the young driver just look at his phone. The young driver hasn't been constantly on his phone. You just there's a moment where they're playing poker and he kind of looks at his phone and Brad Pitt's like, hey man, you got to put your phone down. You got to live in the moment. You just got to not care about all that noise. And instead of the young driver going, fuck you, old man, I was just checking, the time or something, the young driver goes, oh, wow. Like literally, the young driver, old man shakes fist at cell phone, and young, cool, hip driver goes, oh man, you're so wise, and puts his phone down. What the fuck? So this movie is so dumb. Again, it is a SNL parody, but every YouTuber, including you, critic, are like, yeah, it's fun. But to me, I couldn't even have fun watching it. So I
don't think it's fun. I actually don't think it's fun. I admire it purely on a technical level, and I think that's what there's been a trend. I don't want to say it's Dune. I'm not sure when it happened. The first time a huge special effects, practical effects movie was really sweeping the Oscars was what? Lord of the Rings, Return of the King. That's been so many years ago, but in the last few years, as bigger budget movies are being recognized for the Best Picture nomination, I think what's happening is that the screenplays of films are it's not that I'm discrediting these big budget films. I'm not saying I hate Dune. I especially liked Dune Part 1. What I am saying is that screenplays are mattering less. Performances by actors, I think, are mattering a little bit less in terms of getting pictures into that best picture slot, because the kinds of movies we're seeing in that category, you would never see them 10 or 15 years ago. And so there's a lot of screenplay things that are just wrong with F1, but because it was technically good, people are going to raise it up, and they're going to say, well, okay, based on how it was made, shouldn't it be in this category, even if it doesn't reach you on an emotional level, which I do not think that it does. It doesn't have it's too simplified. I was thinking about this as we were talking about it, this aspect of just going around in a circle with some nuance. I'm not trying to insult, major car racing, but what I will say is that it's not like they have the specifics that we had with Top Gun, where the plane has to come in at this angle and then go up and all the things have to be just right. And there's a very specific thing that our brain is activated on. It's a puzzle. We understand that there's a set of puzzle pieces that fit between these borders, as opposed to just going around in a circle. But then I was like, you mentioned Night of the Seven Kingdoms. Honestly, it is in the filmmaking. I actually probably would make it a 1.5 now that I'm thinking about it, because jousting is literally going in a straight line, and the filmmakers that created Night of the Seven Kingdoms made such a amazing, gripping, heart-wrenching, disturbing at times portrait of 4 or 5 men, or I think it was maybe 6, I'm not sure, they're flying at each other in a straight line, and they make it so gut-wrenching. So it doesn't actually matter what the thing is, it's the filmmaker's job to involve us in it, and I don't think F1 actually does, now that I think about it.
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty obvious that after the success and nomination for the Best Picture of Top Gun Maverick, that the producers and the writer-director Joseph Kosinski just said, let's do that again. And
right.
What other thing can we do this with? And they landed on F1, which wasn't a bad idea, because, again, you have this, this vehicle you can, because with Top Gun Maverick, a big part of it, of the appeal, I guess, was that they had cameras in the actual jet fighters, and you had the actual actors in the jet fighters acting like they were flying these things, so it wasn't CGI in that way. There was, I'm sure, plenty of CGI included, but there was some real elements to it, Tom Cruise, the whole thing. And so with F1, they did that, and they pulled that part off. Yeah. What they didn't do is spend time thinking about the script and the character development, which Top Gun Maverick actually has. So you could totally see the producers walking away, the people with the money, thinking, well, okay, we just need an old guy and a young guy, and the old guy always wins, and he's perfect at everything. Okay, check. You need vehicles. Okay, you need cameras on vehicles. Okay, and you need an antagonist. Maybe a rich guy, and that's it. And they forgot what actually is the driver of all good movies, which is the screenplay. And they, it just doesn't have any of the elements. I was just wonder, because, you're a screenwriter, and there are, very basic tenets and things that you're supposed to at least try to follow as you are writing a script, right? And to have these scripts get through all of the stages of script writing, and for no one to be like, here is a 1-page handout on the 5 rules of screenwriting that you have not met with this screenplay. So go back and, and you wouldn't have to change it that drastically, like I was saying earlier. You just have to drop in a few lines here and there, tweak a couple storylines. And it would have a lot of those elements, but it just didn't have any of it. And I just thought, what went wrong here? And then when I found out I was like one of the only people that hated it, I'm like, what's wrong with me? Anyway, let's take a break. We get back. Let's talk about the other 8 Best Picture movies. What do you say?
I'm revving my engine up.
All right, back from the break. So number 3 movie is Frankenstein. Have you seen that?
Loved it. Thought it was fantastic.
How many stars?
I gave it 4.5 stars, but I still need to write my official review.
Well, that's pretty high.
Yeah, it really worked for me. So Frankenstein is a story that we know. I've read the book. I've seen most, I think, Frankenstein movies, most Frankenstein crossovers. Van Helsing, weirdly, when I was in middle school, was the thing that got me obsessed with the old school monsters. So I got these DVD sets that had, from Dracula to Dracula's daughter to Spanish Dracula to the Gill Man or the Creature from the Black Lagoon and Mummy. I loved all that stuff, and I love the Mummy as well, even though they're same director, Stephen Sommers, silly monster movie action, same as Van Helsing. But I liked this one because it was a really fantastic Guillermo del Toro take on the Frankenstein story. So I enjoyed just the very specific ways that he designed sets and costumes. I walked away feeling like I would remember things. There would be images that would stick out to me, like Mia Goth's feathery dress, or the underground or the dungeon where Jacob Elordi is chained up as the creature, or him walking in the snow, all that really beautiful stuff in the cabin in the snow. There how they implemented all the ice that was meant to preserve things. Every little detail was so rich and was so creative, as opposed to just, well, let's pull from what's been done before. Let's go into the attic and pull out all the props and things that everyone's going to expect. I liked that it was someone's crafted world, as movies are homogenizing and becoming more like for products selling than actual pieces unto themselves. Something that is so specific and unique like this, really, really special to me. Loved Frankenstein.
Yeah, for me, I recently watched it, so it's pretty fresh in my mind. And I waited to watch this because I didn't think I would be very much into it, because I don't know that much about Frankenstein. I've never read the book. I, of course, know the tagline of the book, maybe, I guess. But, and I don't know if I've ever actually seen one of the dozens of Frankenstein movies that have come out over the last 100 years. So I came into it, pretty fresh, and I understand that it might break from the book a bit. I don't know, but it wasn't that
closer, actually,
dear to me. Okay, well, it wasn't really important to me that it followed the book, because I don't know the book, and I also don't really like gross out kind of stuff, so I was worried that there'd be a lot of that. But I signed out to watch it because it's an Oscar movie, and I watch all the Oscar movies. and I might have watched it regardless. But the first, 2/5 of the movie, I was actually surprised at how much I was liking it. The look of it, the Guillermo del Toro-ness of it, which I enjoy. Pretty much I'm trying to think of a movie of his that I didn't like. And some of them really.
I don't think you can fault any of them visually. They're just so rich.
Yeah, but also he matches up with good writers, or he writes them himself. That kind of. And so I like the performances, the costumes. Everything was just a little outside of reality. It's all a little cartoonized a little bit, which I can get into. And it was very consistent, and the body gore wasn't over the top, and yet was central. It wasn't ubiquitous. It was central to the story, obviously, because he's piecing together a body from parts of other bodies. And I was into it. But then there's this turning point where, as you mentioned, when they have the monster, Frankenstein has him chained up in the basement of this tower, and Frankenstein starts, and so the monster, the creature, he's essentially a newborn and can't speak and doesn't understand things, and there's a moment where Frankenstein kind of marvels at this, like, oh, he's like a baby, doesn't understand. But then as the creature is kind of struggling with some things and doesn't immediately respond verbally, Frankenstein immediately fucking turns on him and just starts abusing him and treating him like shit, like so quickly. And I was like, wait, did I miss something? Did I miss a scene? Why is this? Was because the whole thing is Frankenstein is obsessed with making a creature that can, reviving essentially, right? And maybe it's implied that it doesn't really fit his vision. It's not perfect. And that's why he's immediately not only just disdainful, but flat out rejecting and abusive of, but it wasn't, I didn't really, I wasn't confident that was the reason why. And I felt like, and then they quickly take a right turn into the rest of the story. And maybe that's the way the book is. But then everything past that, I was bored with, honestly. They start traveling into the Arctic Circle, and I kind of like the scene where he's the spirit of the forest, and apparently that's from the book too. And I was like, oh, that's that moment was a respite in just a lot of just scenes where I was just completely uninterested. And what I wanted it to go back to, and I was like, oh, they really missed what I was hoping where I thought this was headed towards, which was, I don't know if you call it a character study, but a morality story between Frankenstein and the creature, and maybe the woman, right? The sister-in-law of
Elizabeth,
of Frankenstein. Yeah. I thought at the very least, I thought there would be this really interesting relationship, because, they cast a real actor to play the monster, Jacob Elordi, right? So I'm thinking there's going to be some real acting, and Oscar Isaac, obviously. So I'm thinking it's going to be kind of like Ex Machina, right? Where you have this weird relationship between, this creator and this machine, and then this other person that's sort of caught in between. I was wanting that. And that went by in a blink of an eye, and also just almost was never addressed in my. And maybe that's what the book is like, but to me, after that point, I was honestly just pretty bored, and I didn't care. And until the scene with the spirit of the forest bit, I was legitimately like, "Oh, this is kind of nice," that there's some humanity in the world. And that that spins out of control because it's a tragedy of a story. But I don't know. Any thoughts on that complaint about that racing forward, or the not inclusion of that developing feeling in Frankenstein? You know what I mean? Like, am I wrong to think that?
no, you're not wrong. All of that is very fair. I think that Frankenstein is, no pun intended, the sum of its parts. I don't think any Guillermo del Toro film that I've ever watched, with the exception of potentially Pan's Labyrinth, is a film perfectly paced or perfectly plotted. There are a lot of his films that I think are rather flawed narratively. I love The Shape of Water, but there are some things that don't take you from clear character motivation to the end. There are some fast cuts. What I think happens in Del Toro films from time to time is that he wants to get where he wants to get, so he'll just go there. And I admire it in a way, because it's a filmmaker not wasting time on something that they're not really that inspired by, so they're not feeling the pressure. But I would caution this. If Guillermo del Toro is just so good at what he does, I think he sometimes gets away with it. But I also would say it's a part of a trend that I find troubling in movies, which is make good scenes, don't worry how we get there. And even the best movies made on this high level, this is a Del Toro film, they struggle to thread the needle. I rewatched Jaws recently, and I was thinking about how perfectly structured that film is, and yet you could probably take it apart. And in terms of oh, I don't know. There might be some pace discrepancy. There's a major tone shift from the end to the beginning. I mean, Jaws is honestly like two movies. One on the shore, trying to figure out what to do with the shark there, and then trying to figure out what to do on the water. But what happens is you don't ever lose your way, because Spielberg is particularly good at this. He always thinks about the audience. I think that's one of the reasons that his child characters tend to be less annoying, because he cares about the little people, the little person. So when you're watching every single editing transition, you're in good hands getting from that scene to the next. And if the thing that you need is a father sitting across from his son with no dialogue, and there's a little bit of soft orchestra in the background with some piano or whatever, then that's what you need. Because the audience has certain needs that, when neglected, even if there are individual scenes that are fantastic, I think that's where audience members like you are going, hey, I'm over here. I need a little help. You got to get me involved. Don't forget about my humanity. Don't forget about my experiences as a person. Not that they have to represent every single person watching a film. That would be impossible. But you have to keep that core human connection, or else you lose people.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know that we're supposed to consider Frankenstein to be a flawed character, but pretty early on, especially as he was abusing the creature, I fucking hated him. Yeah. I was like, that dude deserves to go away. He's a terrible, terrible human. He's treating this innocent creature that he created, that he was supposedly obsessed with creating, and because it is struggling with language on its first day existing, you're like pushing it down and chaining it up and calling it names and beating it, and it's just I'm like, wow, you're trying to harm a creature. It's like you only created the creature so you could harm it. Now, there are through lines, right? The story of him with his dad and being treated poorly by his dad. But I don't know. I felt like so tell me, in the book or in the movie, is that through line? Am I supposed to say, oh, he's treating the creature like shit, clearly because his dad treated him like shit? Am I supposed to know that, like, automatically?
The father stuff, all the stuff at the beginning, it's been a hot minute since I've read the book. I don't remember any of that, but I do remember distinctly his disappointment and his need to destroy the creature. I also remember the creature being written as beautiful and intelligent. And one thing that I feel like was Del Toro's way into the narrative was actually focusing on the father, the disappointed father. I really enjoyed the beginning of the film. Anything that gets me more Charles Dance, I'm going to sign up for. But this idea that we pass on the trauma that we receive, I also think, I mentioned Pan's Labyrinth earlier. There's a thread in a lot of his work that we pass on trauma to the next generation. I think that's pretty clear. And so from that perspective, I guess maybe I was pulling on my past knowledge of Del Toro's work to attach that here narratively. But I think because the beginning was so strong, I saw Oscar Isaac's character, Frankenstein. I saw Frankenstein become his father. And that's, I guess, how I accepted it, which is that's all he knew about being a parent.
Yeah. I mean, okay. And as I was watching it, like a half an hour later, as I was like, oh, so this is never going to correct. Frankenstein's never going to come around and be a human being. And so I'm like, what's missing? Oh, yeah. So why did he turn on him in the basement? And then I'm like, so am I supposed to take away that was him repeating his dad's stuff? Because that wasn't clear, and it was so quick. It's so quick. I thought, I was just hoping for more Frankenstein and the creature in the tower. It was almost, because you have this, oh my God, there's a humongous coyote that is right outside my window.
Wow, that's incredible.
Ginormous. Yeah. I
He
just
must have known that
looked
you
at me.
were talking about a gothic horror film. Said, "Hello, I'm here."
Yeah. Yeah, and I will say the CGI wolves were kind of goofy. I just feel like they need to understand that CGI is never going to work very well in situations like that, and they need to make it a little more off screen. I feel like they will put I think they trust too much in CGI in situations like that. Like with Jaws, for example, halfway through the production, famously Steven Spielberg is like, this shark looks like shit.
Yeah.
So now I have to change the script so we don't see it very often. And I think that's good advice today with CGI. You don't have to see it clearly like there were shots of like multiple wolves running through the screen in pretty bright daylight. And it's rough to watch that. Anyway, so yeah, so the first half I would have given Frankenstein, I don't know, 6 or 7, and then I eventually landed on a 3 because the last 3/5 of the movie I was just unconcerned with anything that was happening. But really anyone, even Elizabeth's character, I was like, we only occasionally kind of get back to her, and I was like,
Well, they
I don't
changed
understand
her.
anyone's motivation.
She's completely different. I mean, she's not. I mean, not so different, but her main connection is not with the creature in the book. It is with Frankenstein, and the only real reason that her and the creature connect in the book is not connect, intersect in their stories, is because of Frankenstein's refusal to make his creature a mate. So that is depicted, but so Del Toro made it more faithful by creating a creature that's more recognizable to fans of the book, to threading the narrative from the perspective of it being a told story more like the book. It happens in sequence more like the book, but he recontextualized things. I think that's what he wanted to do. He said, I'm going to be faithful in adaptation, but I'm going to tell the audience how I'm going to bring new levels to these character relationships and to the theming of, the sins of the father. I think that's what he wanted to do, so, for better or worse.
Yeah. I mean, just imagine if we had really the rest of the movie, and this, I guess, would not be following the book, but imagine if you had, from that point of, Elizabeth comes over and Frankenstein is trying to obscure the fact that the creature is downstairs, and you have the rest of the movie is just Elizabeth, her husband or her fiance, or that guy, and Frankenstein and the creature, and you have the four of them in the tower in that wonderful production design set, and you have that question and that drama play out for the rest of the book, where she has compassion, the maternal human compassion, maybe sexual, maybe that sort of develops. You have, kind of like Poor Things, where you have this emerging adult body, able-bodied creature that has the mind of an infant. You have Frankenstein with all of his complicated feelings about his own father. He has humanity, Frankenstein, because he knows what it's like to be abused and harmed. So he struggles in his relationship with Frankenstein. He's jealous of Elizabeth's attraction to the creature, which they depicted kind of. But by the time that was happening, I'm like, I don't give a shit about you, Frankenstein. You're a complete sadistic asshole. Like he
is the villain of the movie.
Yeah. And you could still make him into that. But the first, half of the movie, we're with Frankenstein. We see him go through shit with his dad. We see him try to push back against the medical establishment. We're supposed to identify with him. And I understand, things can be complicated, but it just takes this total right turn. And then we have all these, sort of flash forwards to him on the ship, and he's telling a story, and I'm just like, you're a piece of shit. And I hope the monster fucking gets you. You know what I mean? And also, I don't even know if I care. And also, I don't know if I really care about the creature all that much. I mean, he's innocent, clearly, but he's never going to work in society. You know what I mean? Like, this is not, like you should never have been created. It sucks. Yeah, I don't know. Anyway, next movie, Hamnet. Did you see that?
I did. Yeah.
What'd you think?
I gave it a 3. I think it's really, really much. I don't want to be a person that reduces a film to. It's not my intention really ever, unless I think the movie is misstepped, and I don't think this did. It's a performance film. That was sort of what I sat down, really enjoyed Jesse Buckley, really enjoyed Paul Mescal, and the story was okay. I love Hamlet, so seeing the real quote unquote story of the son, them losing their son, which of course was part of the inspiration for one of my favorite plays of all time. Cool. I didn't find it that thrilling, so I was like, it's good. It doesn't insult me. Terrific performances. 3.
Yeah, I gave it. What did I give it? I gave it a 4 out of 10. So you're giving it like a 6 out of 10, essentially.
Yeah.
Or I'm giving it a 2 out of 5 in your vernacular. But similar to Frankenstein, not as bad though. But I really liked the beginning. It was very unique feel, and Jesse Buckley is amazing in it, and I thought the script was interesting. But then, when they start getting into the tragedies that occur, and I'm just going to say it, they're directed to be this way, but it was completely overacted. I mean, is it conceivable that people would scream like that? Yeah, I guess, but it's all we get. It's almost, like you were saying about creating scenes rather than a story. And I don't know, but it's possible that the creators of this artwork were thinking, I need to have Jesse Buckley screaming in a certain point, and I'm just gonna build up to that moment or something. I don't know. And I don't study William. The last time I read any of William Shakespeare would have been in high school, and I struggled with it then. And so, I respect it. And when I have had it explained to me, I'm like, oh, because it's literally a different language. It's English words, but I have literally no idea what even certain phrases are referring to. So I was like, I don't think I'm the audience for this movie, because the one part of the movie that I enjoyed was when we were getting back to William Shakespeare writing Hamlet and him preparing and him building up to that, and I thought that if they had focused 90% of the movie on that and 10% on the stuff that they focused on, I think it would have been better for me. I think I would have still had to look up what Hamlet and what the lines mean. I mean, I know the general storyline, and I heard that the movie was this humongous tearjerker, but I teared up a little bit at the end because I basically tear up at everything, but I was resisting because I'm like, this could have been a short film. Like, if they reduced it to 15 minutes, I think it would have been more powerful, honestly, because it all comes together in the last 5 minutes. And I get it, trauma and grief and relationships and emotion and the reality of all that. But I don't know. I just felt like there just needed to be something more, and I think it would have helped if they focused at least half of the movie on William Shakespeare when he's in London and he's, developing his work and his play and stuff. And we got like we get like a couple minutes of it about 2/3 through the movie. And then the last scene is, in the round. And, so I respect it. Chloe Zhao, excellent director. On an airplane, I'm guessing I would really like watch this movie. It was, perfectly acted, cinematography. the woods scenes and the sort of witchy stuff that, Jessie Buckley is doing was just like really compelling. The kid acting was off the charts. The ending was pretty effective. It was very human in that very Chloe Zhao sort of way. But the script, I just felt like it I don't know. I just wish it had just something more entertaining.
Well,
it's a funny thing.
I love that you said somewhere along the way in your last few sentences, you said something towards, I got it. And I think that's the problem is I felt the same way when I was watching it. It's not to discredit what is happening, but you kind of go, and so that's sort of how I felt, and ... where would you like me to intellectualize, extrapolate? Where am I supposed to navigate the waters of this movie? I think Hamnet just played what's on the page. It's just everything is exactly it. I recently did a rewatch of all, as you do, all of Twin Peaks, Fire Walk with Me, all of the other Twin Peaks, the newer stuff. I'm like about to go further down my David Lynch because I just miss that man so much. One thing he never did was just play everything exactly as you would expect. And I think that's something that is, I'm not asking, it's a really tall order to tell filmmakers, hey, be David Lynch. But what I will say is I would like to challenge filmmakers that have these resources to make these films is, and what else? What's in the white space of the script? Not just the words that are on the page. And we talked a little bit off camera, maybe you and I talked even on camera beforehand about this by a hair's degree. But I think it's this simplification of movies and in dialogue where it's, we want you to understand this. And there's nothing challenging about Hamnet, even though it's good.
Yeah. I'm. It's interesting to hear your perspective as a Hamlet fan, because I was wondering if all of the love around this was because it fleshes out a beloved Shakespeare play.
But it doesn't really. In my opinion, it doesn't. Oh, yeah, it gives us stuff, but it doesn't actually deepen the depth of relationship that people who love Hamlet will have with that piece. My theater nerd friend from college, who I still talk to all the time, she texted me after Hamnet and went, "Oh, so that was a movie, that was just a movie doing a movie thing," and that's true. And so we both went, "Yeah, like that wasn't particularly interesting. It was kind of boring." I would describe the theming around his wife's predicament as definitely worthy of attention, but a little superficial in terms of the way it was depicted. And I think that Jessie Buckley's performance went a long way towards making it feel a lot more nuanced than it probably was on the page. And I didn't really, I don't have a different relationship with Hamlet after having watched it. It's like going to an aquarium. It says you're going to walk by the coral reef and, oh, yep, there's the coral reef. It's beautiful. Yeah, a little hypnotic. There were things about the editing, like you said, that I found quite hypnotic. But you walk through the exhibit and you go, there it was.
Yeah. Yeah, I was wondering because there's a movie about the early Beatles before they were famous called Nowhere Boy. And I love that movie, but that's because I'm a Beatles fanatic, and I'm guessing that if you weren't a Beatles fanatic, you would just think it was a boring movie, maybe, So I at the end of the movie, I'm like, oh, I bet you anything, because why is this nominated for? I mean, it's pretty obviously nominated because it just feels like an Oscar movie, I guess. But yeah, I also wondered if it was getting a lot of love because Hamlet superfans would just be like, "Oh my God, I was just eating it up," and to hear at least one Hamlet fan in yourself saying like, "Yeah, meh." Anyway, next movie, Marty Supreme. Did you see that?
Did not like it, but I highly respect it.
Interesting. How many letterbox out of 5 would you give it?
I gave it a 3. I'd have to review that. I might have given it a 3.5. I I found it hard to invest in the characters because I found what was happening on screen kind of like how you felt with watching Frankenstein. I think this is a me thing. I was particularly triggered by all the dog stuff. I I I'm very sensitive to neglect of animals and the the commoditization of animals, losing animals and it not being the Save the Cat people, that wrote that book about filmmaking. I think they would have a field day with this movie because I just never ever cared what was going to happen to this guy. And then at the end, I felt like they pulled a fast one on you. They go, look at this very sweet, without revealing it, look at this very sweet series of shots, which, by the way, Luca Guadagnino already used with Timothée Chalamet at the end of Call Me By Your Name. Yeah, Timothée Chalamet, very good at looking at a camera and emoting for a camera when it's just zooming in on his face. We had that several years ago. They're going to do it again. And it just felt like they were like, and look, all along, wasn't he kind of a nice guy? In my head, I went, absolutely fucking not. So
interesting. Yeah, I totally understand that. I knew going into this movie, as I'm guessing you did too, since it's a Safdie movie, that you would have a flawed, frenetic character. At
good time stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Uncut gems kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And I gave it a 7 out of 10. I liked it. It wasn't amazing, but I liked it. I marveled at how much money, at what I'm thinking they spent on this movie, because there were so many period scenes, where they have to recreate like a street where there's period accurate cars and people.
Oh, that was awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. I just thought, like, my God, because that's really hard. And there would be like just 3 seconds of a shot. And I'm thinking they probably spent a week just setting up that 3-second shot. And so I was kind of marveling at that. But I, I had a similar feeling with the dog as well. But I also know that in the past, people didn't really give a shit about animals the way that they do today, on average, anyway. And I, in contrast to Hamnet and some of these other movies, the thing that I liked about Marty Supreme was that I was on the edge of my seat. I wasn't necessarily rooting for Marty because he's an asshole, but at least there were stakes, and kind of low stakes, obviously, because, there's kind of a gangster shootout situation, but for the most part, it's just this dirtbag who is, genuinely suffering from narcissism and is trying to eke out fame and fortune, and he's always on the brink and everything. And it moves, the movie just as propulsive as any Safdie movie is. And I could kind of relate in a way, in the, pursuit of a goal, in the kind of frustrations along the way that it's never really quite clean, and that you might be a poor loser at times, and it was clear that the message of the movie was that he was different than other people in that he was a dick. Like, he would bump into other table tennis people, and they would always react to him just like, Jesus Christ, dude, like, calm down, And that's not how this works. You can't just barge in, And so he was an anomaly, so that, the hope of humanity was still, retained in the story. And yeah, if you're not at least latching on a little bit to Marty's character, then it's going to be a hard watch. But like I said, contrary to something like Hamnet or Train Dreams is another movie, which is a whole other kind of goal, but it's easy to watch because there's so many things happening so quickly. And I don't think it's meaningless. I think it all, creates this situation, and you just get this, if you have, like I said, if you identify even kind of with Marty, you just feel this like, oh, it's just out of reach. You know what I mean? Anyway,
Yeah.
and I kind of liked the way it wrapped up at the end when he's going against the Japanese guy. It wasn't silly or cartoonish or something. It felt realistic and earned and that kind of stuff.
It's not, I don't think anything felt unearned. I think the thing I was, I think, supposed to feel was the element of tragedy. Sorry, if anybody's been wondering why my voice feels a little weird, I'm battling some pretty severe allergies at the moment. But anyway, hopefully that's not affected anybody's experience. I personally feel that if I'm going to be invested in the tragedy of this man, then I'm going to need to see him try things in different ways. To me, what I saw from the beginning to the end is a man who swindles and hustles, and that's what he did from the beginning all the way to the end. So I didn't sense any progression in terms of his character. I didn't feel like his character was tested by anything other than a very inconvenient external force. And that was sort of what I was looking for, was a little bit of a level change there for him as a character. Or if it's not supposed to be a tragedy and it's supposed to be a dark comedy, I'm totally fine watching movies about terrible people. I don't need them to be morally right, but ideally I'd either like the sense of tragedy or I want to be laughing. And at no point did I find this film to be even remotely funny, other than when Kevin, Mr. Wonderful, was on. I did think that he was very bizarrely good at this particular character, and now apparently he's campaigning to be the next Bond movies, or excuse me, the next Bond villain. So maybe I'll enjoy it. I don't know.
Did you like Uncut Gems?
I did, but again, I and that's why I'm not gonna say there's anything wrong with the movie. I think the Safdie vehicle is really just not my thing. I think it's partly in the way that it depicts humanity and the way that they don't challenge any kind of. Here's what I think they do a great job at. They depict the problems with a system. And I think that they're really great at telling deep, moving stories about concepts of our humanity and society that ought to be looked at. That's fantastic. I am a character guy, which is why something that's more narratively flawed, like Frankenstein, I was able to get into that a little bit more. Mind you, that's a huge genre leap to go from comparing this to that. But I love character, which is why something like The Housemaid, which is the Paul Feig joint from this year, not as good a film, had a better time because I liked the characters more. I was more invested, even though everything about the movie is going, just remember, this is like a neo-noir from the 90s, erotic thriller. It's Basic Instinct-y, so don't take it seriously. You can't deny that Amanda Seyfried is killing it. And that's when you get into this, not to go into a monologue here, I'll try to keep it to a sentence or two, but why you have a person who's absolutely killing it in a movie like Hamnet, people are going to take notice because the movie's directed and produced to feel like an Oscar movie. You can kill it, as Amanda Seyfried did in The Housemaid, but it's written and directed and produced to be a genre film, a disposable, erotic thriller genre film that you can take your girlfriends to after cocktails and have a good time. So it's not going to get the same notice. So it's a bit of that tailoring factor that I become uncomfortable with, when really we should be just examining the work itself, as opposed to saying this is an Oscar film, that's not. But to bring it back to Marty Supreme, great film, terrific work. Everyone on it should be completely proud of themselves. I think Safdie's just not particularly my taste.
Yeah. I would imagine, when I'm recommending movies to people, I try to think of my particularities, and I have a particularity for the Safdie brothers. I mean, I don't, they're not like top, I don't typically give their movies like a 9 or a 10, but that style works on me. The Uncut Gems and Marty Supreme are very similar movies, and my wife Stacy hates Uncut Gems. She was like, it's stressful. I don't understand why he's ruining his life. I can't identify with him. It's a tragedy at the end. It's terrible. And all that's true. But I think of it, maybe it taps into some, I don't know, just something about that exaggerated cringe feeling that you get the morning after, and you wake up and you're just like, why the fuck did I do that? And then like the next weekend you're doing it again. You know, it just kind of has that, it taps into that in this exaggerated way. By the way, while I'm on the psychology tip, just kind of rewinding back to Bugonia, obviously with the psychology of that movie is paranoia and extremism on one hand. And on the other, you have this corporate speak go-getter inhuman person who is about exploitation. And, you know, you could even take a feminist angle and say that she has to become more, you know, paternalistic and more oppressive to fit into the male-dominated corporate, you know, cutthroat world or something. And then the third character, you have this kind of bumbling guy, cousin of Jesse Plemons, I think, right? And someone that has a heart, but is not smart enough to kind of absorb the landscape. And so it's like you're only, in today's society, the only way to remain human is to be oblivious or stupid, you know, because of the pressures of capitalism and the echo chambers and the paranoia. And, you know, because Bugonia, they purposely in the script kept it away from QAnon or from the KKK, or like the Jesse Plemons paranoia, you know, conspiracy theory doesn't map onto anything familiar, right? I mean, there are definitely elements, right? But I was wondering, I was like, oh, is this like a QAnon thing or incel thing? But there are elements of that, but not really. And that was smart because it keeps us at least partially sympathetic kind of to Jesse Plemons, you know? But anyway, so that's the psychology there. F1, that there's no fucking psychology there. It's, I guess, if we look through the script, we can see an aging, toxic male who has a fantasy about being an old guy that shows up and tells everyone off and gets to have sex with a girl who clearly told you she has boundaries around that. And everyone thinks you're a genius, and then you get to go to Baja and be an awesome driver. It's fucking ridiculous. That's the psychology there. Hamnet, obviously, grief and loss, and about women being left behind, often to deal with 99% of the tragedies involved in home. It also has to do with just like the unfair nature of the plague and of viruses that can just kill people. And you know, you have that moment where the son sacrifices, you know, for his sister, and the beauty of that, and the processing of one's grief through art. And then the mom, the wife, Jessie Buckley, she only learns about, and that was another thing that I have a nitpick, is that the whole thing wraps up with the wife, the mom, seeing, oh, my husband is grieving because I've been yelling at him through the second half of this movie this whole time, rightfully so to some extent. And, oh, I see, he's been processing it through this character. What a beautiful thing. And then we're just supposed to let him off the hook for just not being there, you know? That's is that the implication, Colin?
I think that it was plotting and scene work that was in service of a performance, not in service of a character arc or in the greater impact of the script. I think that's why it felt kind of hollow. I was having a hard time with, her name is Agnes, by the way. I was having a hard time with Agnes just because, I mean, not to like put my like rainbow badge on, but sometimes like my gay activates and I'm just like, bitch, you're like, what do you mean? You're yelling at him. You told him to go. Like, what do you, where do you get off? I mean, yeah, I understand all the cultural implications and the stuff she was going through, but like, I got sassy for a moment with her. I'm like, you are yelling at this man who, yes, had his own drama. Like, he's toxic too, but you are also telling him to do this. Like, he would not have gone without your consent. So it just, to me, they should have like a movie that's better than this is The Wife with Glenn Close and Jonathan Pryce that came out a few years ago, which I thought she should have won an Oscar for. The Glenn Close Oscar thing makes me upset. I'm not going to go there. That is where you understand why this it's sort of the put upon wife narrative done right, because you see you feel the intricate context of why she doesn't say this needs to stop until the time that she finally does. And I was waiting for that understanding and comprehension of the Agnes character. It didn't come. All I was sort of getting was this woman is going to get an Oscar because she's doing absolutely everything in her power to service the scene itself. So,
and maybe rightfully so, given the script. I thought her performance was amazing. She's a very electric actor.
You can't look away.
Her voice is electric. Mm-hmm. It has this husky, but still, I don't know. It was amazing. And with Marty Supreme, the psychology is narcissism, perfectionism, self-destruction, all that. One battle after another. How many stars out of 5 would you give it?
I haven't seen this one yet.
Oh, well, I will. There's not much to say. I give it a 9 out of 10. I love Paul Thomas Anderson, which is very Gen X dude of me, of course. And I love this movie. I thought that this movie is entertaining. It's funny. It's well acted. It has a point to it. It's a little cartoony in that it doesn't map exactly onto reality. There are elements where you're like, well, that wouldn't happen, or that's not the way that would look. And whenever I recommend this movie, I tell people that. I tell you, like, the way it's shot and acted, it's as if it is an ultra realistic depiction of a possibility, but it still feels very grounded. And there's some really, gritty, human, physical, emotional scenes, particularly towards the end. I loved it. And I think it has kind of an interesting point politically. And I thought that Leo, as always, is wonderful. He plays a bumbling stoner dad who, I rewatched it a couple times and it's hilarious to me. There's this whole sequence where he's arguing with this guy on the phone, and I don't know, it's really funny. The Secret Agent. I have not seen it. Have you?
I have.
So give me a rundown of your thoughts.
Well, I think it's a pretty grounded, earnest movie. It's not really treading any new ground in terms of the style of the filmmaking. What I watched it for is Wagner Mora. Apologies if I mispronounced the name. I really, really love his acting. I think that's kind of the main draw of the film, really. But there's an authentic atmosphere. I'm very drawn to places in film that transcend, that allow me to invest in escaping from where I am. And you really do. It's similar to when I watched Queer last year with Daniel Craig. And also you mentioned Marty Supreme. Sometimes the intricacy of the set design, but also the camera used and the way that it's used can really transport you to that time. And I felt like I was, in the 1970s, which was, is always a welcome thing for me. I'm particularly fascinated by the 60s and 70s. I like that there's been a lot of alternative takes on the super spy. This one, there's Crime 101. Recently there was the Michael Fassbender film. There's a lot of attention on the hyper, quote unquote masculine, suave secret agent type. And they do a good job of making Wagner just like an ordinary dude who happens to have a job that puts him in that context. Great cinematography, great setting. Love that the Oscars are taking a look at, Brazil. Why not? That's fantastic. There's a lot of tension, and this was an instance where I wasn't like, ha ha ha, oh my God, this is so funny. But there's a darkly sort of comedic edge that I think most viewers, if they're open to it, will find charming. And I highly recommend it. Highly recommend it. And I do have a question for you, because maybe you know this, because I know you have your famous Oscar parties, so you might know more about the Oscars than even me. What is the stipulation on submitting a film for Best Feature? Because I'm a little confused about A, distribution, streaming, and then B, also what country it originates from. Like, does it have to be a joint production with an American company? Or
No.
Yeah, I just didn't know. Because like Sentimental Value isn't either. That's another foreign film that's nominated. So
Yeah. Well, this is just from memory, but the qualifications are that it has to have been released in the year that they are nominating movies from, the initial release date, and it has to have been in the theaters for a certain amount of time. And by being in the theaters, it has to have ran in X amount of theaters for X amount of days. And so that's why when Netflix makes an Oscar bait movie that they don't plan on really pushing into the theaters very much because they want people to watch it on Netflix, is they will put it in the 15 theaters in random places around the country for 2 weeks, and that qualifies as an Oscar movie. There's a lot of debate around this because it's like, well, isn't a movie a movie? What does it matter if it was in the theater? And I go kind of back and forth. Lately, I land on, a movie's a movie. Let's say that a movie came out during the pandemic, for example, and it didn't make any sense to put in the theaters because theaters weren't open or something. Does that mean that the piece of art is not a movie? If
sure.
But you start getting into some weird territory where it's like, well, then what is a movie exactly? Can a YouTube essay that's 90 minutes long be a movie? But I think it's pretty obvious when you actually watch a quote unquote movie that it's a movie and not just a random YouTube video. Anyway.
I just get mad when I can't see it. That's really where I begin and end on it. Is I just get upset sometimes that they pick the select theaters in, the bubbles of where art and culture meet, the hubs, right? Like they'll go New York, they'll go California. Maybe I'll get a chance in Dallas if I'm lucky. It took months and months for us to get Pillion, especially since the subject nature of that movie was such that, Bible Belt, probably sentimentalities would reject it. But I'm just saying it's frustrating as a person who wants to watch movies in a theater. Like, I understand that streaming companies are pushing their company and they want the films to be there, but I don't know. I appreciated that I got to see Frankenstein, for example, on a big screen. And I just think we shouldn't remove the person like me who understands that they can access it at their home, but would still like the option of going to the theater. So
yeah, I mean, economically, it doesn't seem like a bad thing or a detrimental thing to the Netflixes of the world because everything is digital. So it's just a matter of sending the digital file to the theater and then they project it onto a screen. So and you could charge money, obviously, additional money than the Netflix fee. So yeah, it doesn't make any sense that they wouldn't offer that. But I don't know, economically, it might not actually pan out because as a movie theater lover myself, I'm going to fewer and fewer movies in theaters because movie theaters just don't have the good movies anymore. In my neck of the woods, most of the movie theaters are only showing horror movies that I've never heard of, and I don't like horror because it's the one thing that people still think of when they think of going to the movies. It's when you watch a horror movie, you want to go with people, you want to see it in a dark room with a bunch of people. You don't want to be sitting in your living room, apparently.
Or the big budget Avatar-y ones, like the event movie.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. there was a time when I think on average was going to the movies twice a week, maybe 3 times a week. I remember when I was in college and I didn't have any money to get a ticket, a movie ticket. It was probably like $5 a time or something. And I literally went into my Honda Civic and checked under all the car seats and managed to find enough change and cobbling together a couple of dollars from my wallet to pay for a movie because I love going to the movie theaters. I love it. I love it. Since the pandemic, there's just been this huge drop off because of the offerings, honestly. And I probably now go to the movie theaters once every couple months, if that, which is bizarre, honestly. But I still think I'm enjoying movies. I turn off all the lights and I try to sit comfortably, and I don't have a second screen. I don't really understand that trend. It feels like you're not getting anything. It's multitasking and everything is diminished, right? If you have a movie on and you have a second screen and you're also checking your phone, like it feels like you should just pause the movie and go onto your, anyway, each their own.
What did David Lynch say that one time? He was like, "You're crazy if you think you've seen a film on your fucking phone. My God." I mean, I love that.
Yeah, well, he's talking about watching right. A movie on your phone. Yeah. Which, I kind of get, but at the same time, if you have good enough eyesight and you can put the phone right up next to your head and you have good headphones, it's not terrible, right? Sentimental Value. So I haven't seen that. That one looks really good to me. I think I might watch that tonight because the Oscars are coming up, and you make The Secret Agent sound pretty good too. I like a good on it as The Americans is one of my favorite TV shows of all time, and it's totally along those lines. A spy movie that isn't all slick and James Bonded out.
Although
by the way, I hated
Black Bag was really.
I hated that movie.
Oh, were you about to say you hated it?
Well, it didn't make any sense. Like the story, I was like absurd, and and maybe I should have known that heading into it. But it's all outfits and attitude, and
you're right about that. You're right.
I just didn't understand. I didn't understand the motivation of the character. And we're supposed to be like, oh, who did it? And I'm like, okay, mystery. And then as they go through it, I'm like, so this is kind of like a Scooby-Doo episode where they wrap it up at the end. I mean, I thought Fassbender and what's her face. You think
Blanchett.
that. Yeah, you just think that the script would be better. And because, not exactly the same, obviously, but a similar movie that Fassbender made was The Killer.
Killer from Fincher, right?
Fincher. And, it has a similar kind of, vibe to it. It's a completely different sort of movie, but it's in that vein. And that movie was perfect. I loved Killer.
Love it. I love it too.
Now you could say, well, there's not much of a script because you don't really need one when you have a traveling contract killer. Anyway, Sentimental Value. What did you think of that?
I haven't seen it, so we're in the same boat.
Oh, well, Jiminy Crickets. Well, it looks good. It has good reviews.
Love the actors in it.
It has
Stellan
Skarsgård and
Fanning.
It looks like from the previews, it's a movie about a young woman and her dad, and I think maybe they're in art, and she has like a complicated relationship with him. In fact, it might be kind of like Jay Kelly, and like I saw a little bit from the preview where she's like, "You were never there for me," and you have this artist who's at the end of his career who wants to reconnect with his daughter. What do you think of Jay Kelly? Did you see that?
No, I have not seen it.
Oh, I really liked that movie. I thought it'd be kind of goofy. And of course, as an old guy myself, because it is about an old guy, George Clooney, basically is playing himself. And he's reckoning with the fact that he sacrificed his life and his family to achieve fame and fortune as, an A-list actor. And he's trying to reconnect with his daughters. And it's a comedy, so, it's got its funny moments. And I could see how people wouldn't like Jay Kelly, because if you don't connect with Jay Kelly, George Clooney, then you're just going to be like, why do I care? Right. And I get that for sure. But the movie moves pretty quick. It's light, it's airy, but it gets, it touches, I think. And it doesn't really answer the question. It doesn't wrap up well. It's not like, everything's fine. Like it ends where you're just like, huh. And there is a story arc to the Jay Kelly character, anyway. And Adam Sandler plays this amazing agent of Jay Kelly, and his character is really great. Anyway,
sounds a little bit like
Sinners.
That was a movie that I really liked this year, but anyway.
Which movie?
Urchin. It's a Harris Dickinson. He was in Baby Girl as an actor, but he directed it.
Interesting.
It's a comedy drama, weird. So, good.
In fact, I don't understand why Jay Kelly wasn't nominated for Best Picture instead of F1, because Jay Kelly just seemed like the perfect Oscar nomination, because it's about Hollywood. Hollywood loves to nominate movies about itself,
Oh yeah.
It has George Clooney. It has Adam Sandler in an amazing role. It takes place in Europe. So, it's like, it is weird. Why would F1? Why not Jay Kelly? They must have hated Netflix or something. Do they just not? But Frankenstein is Netflix. Anyway, Sinners. You've certainly seen Sinners.
Of course I've seen Sinners.
How many Letterboxd stars?
I give it 4 stars. I think it's a great, great film. I think it's made super well. I think it's a very simple story. I think that but it tells it in a very rich way. So I'm fine with it being a simple story. Some simple stories can be very deep. Your emotions can be brought into the experience, so you don't have to have this major weaving narrative and, oh my god, I didn't expect the characters to go this way. So I really, really loved it. I would say my favorite parts of the movie, I really loved Acts 1 and 2. I think Act 3 is very good, but I don't think I don't know how you feel about this, but the emotional, I don't want to say come down, but everything emotionally that takes place after the dance music big event scene sort of pales in comparison, no pun intended, to what just happened. It's not that the stuff after that is bad. I like it all. But that was where I think the movie almost peaked a little too quickly for it to be like a perfect 5-star film. But yeah, terrific performances, exceptional choreography. The director, so glad Ryan got a nomination, and I think it really captured the soul of the moment. So good on you, movie.
Yeah, I gave it a similar rating of 7 out of 10, which would translate into 3.5 in your Letterboxd world. And same. I loved the first half, maybe the first 2 thirds, and the last half I was bored out of my mind.
It's pretty boring.
I guess that's the theme is like the first half. Yeah. Now I don't think it's a spoiler to tell people it's a vampire movie. At least it's pretty apparent early on in the movie.
After seeing the trailer, I would hope that wouldn't be a spoiler.
Yeah. So yeah, it delivers in that respect in spades at the end, right? And so you can't really blame it for that. But it, to me, felt like when I was watching From Dusk Till Dawn with Quentin Tarantino and George Clooney, and Quentin Tarantino wrote and directed the first half of the movie, and then what's his name, his friend, who he worked with on that other movie that he did, Death
Proof. Oh, Robert Rodriguez.
Robert Rodriguez directed and wrote the last half of the movie, and it's very similar in that the first half is tension, and characters, and dialogue, and the second half is just this goofy ass fucking, I think, zombie. Is it zombies in From Dusk Till Dawn? So now too. Sinners is a lot. Sinners' second half is a lot better than From Dusk Till Dawn in terms of story and directing and all that kind of stuff. Because Robert Rodriguez too, he'll advertise himself as he made Machete, for example. He's camp. So Sinners is better than that. But I can't fault a vampire movie for having a lot of death and gore and blood and killing at the end, because it's a fucking vampire movie. That's what you're gonna get. But I don't like vampire movies. I don't really like zombie movies. I want a story. I want character, and in the end, it just felt like a free for all. Which, again, that's the genre. There's a free for all sense to it, like inevitability of blood and carnage. But yeah, the build up to it was I just thought was a masterpiece. Yeah, I thought the first 2/3, like you said, were really good. The tension, the writing, the themes, the sexuality, the racism, the class kind of, and also it's this little, I don't know if it's accurate, but it's this little kind of glimpse into what, parties would have looked like back then in the South, where, because it has the feel of what an authentic, black nightclub in the middle of the South would feel like, the event promotion and the bouncer at the front door and the darkness that's beyond the front porch light of the, and it's not in the middle of town because of segregation or, it had like all those elements. It just felt very immersive as a world. And, I was fully into it. So if it was just the first 2/3, I would have given it a 9 or an 8 or something. But, the last half, I'm just like, okay, enough of the blood. But then I was kicking myself and I'm like, it's a fucking vampire movie, Kirk. What are you going to do? All right. Train Dreams. What'd you think of that?
Loved it. I'm a huge Joel Edgerton fan, and I have been for quite some time. He did a film not too long ago that I took my mom to called Boy Erased, that I think is pretty special, about the erasure of the homosexual identity because of Christianity and how parents relate to that who are Christian. And I love what he does. I've loved everything he's touched, pretty much, even his performances and things like The Gift. I just always think he has a sweet touch to his performances. There's always this depth behind his eyes, and I look for that in people where maybe they're not. Actually, both him and Nicole Kidman in Boy Erased are two actors that I think exemplify that, where they don't have to telegraph, and sometimes they get overlooked as actors because they do a lot of subtle stuff with their eyes and their lips and their voice. And so I just love Joel Edgerton. I love the cinematography. You can seduce me with cinematography. It can cover up, some issues there. I think that's what happened a little bit with Frankenstein. It just absorbed me into the visual aspect of it. The beauty of the natural world. I've really been getting into birding. I've always had, we've talked many times about my connection with the ocean. I love animals. I felt the rich depiction of a forest, not just forests, but also like the destruction of forests that really pulled on my heartstrings. I thought it was a very like thematically deep movie where, again, if you're a nature lover, I think you'll connect to how humans relate to not just nature as it appears, as it is, but what are we supposed to do in or with nature? How do we coexist? And anyway, just a lot of shots in that film dictated meaning to me on that level without it having to connect so intrinsically to the narrative itself. Sometimes I walk away with a few images, and that's sort of enough for me. Really, really great atmosphere. Again, like similar to Sinners in that way, where you're sort of looking back on this time when people connected to each other in a different way. I actually think that's why they're both nominated. Both Sinners and this have the synergy of it being about human connection at a time when we didn't have the distractions and the things getting in the way of our connections that we do now. A return, if you will, not to when things were better politically, when people had more rights, people were dying more often. There's tons of things that were worse, but in terms of relating to the world, it's just true that we related in a different way, and we have different struggles now. So yeah, I really like it. I have not read the thing that it's based on, so I can't connect it to the novella, but I did like this film. It sounded earlier like you didn't really like it. Is that true?
No, I liked it. So I ended up giving it a 6 out of 7. a reverse trend is that the beginning I was like, what's going on? But then the second half isn't thematically different. It's not like a vampire movie at the end, but more story beats progress in the second half. And I lamented not having more patience in the beginning. I think about a third of the way through the movie, I'm like, oh, is this like a Terrence Malick bullshit thing? Which I'm not a fan of. Another, like Brad Pitt life. I mean, I like Terrence Malick, some movies, the Thin Red Line, these movies, but the movies where, and God bless, it's an art form, it's well made, but it's just not for me, the Terrence Malick thing.
The Tree of Life, and, not your speed. Right.
It just not, and again, I respect it. I respect all of that.
Yeah.
But it's not, when I watch a movie, that's not what I'm hoping to have happen. And in the first half of Train Dreams, it's very Terrence Malick-y. And so I was starting to get kind of angry. I'm like, fuck. Why would they nominate this for Best Picture? Now I have to fucking sit through it. But then the second half, it doesn't change tone drastically, but there are, I don't know, just more story, I guess, that occurs. And then I was like, oh, okay, I get it. I get what they were doing. They're setting up in the beginning the character and the atmosphere, and then, it makes you feel more as the very, very subtle story, but definitely story occurs. For those who haven't watched the movie, it's about a guy. It's basically about his whole adult life, and it's a guy who is working at the early 20th century, I believe, and he's actually another. Huh?
Idaho, right?
What was that?
Is it set in Idaho?
Well, he's supposed to be in the Pacific Northwest. It might be Idaho, but it also could be Washington. They talk about Oregon as well. Anyway, it's in my neck of the woods, literally. And the way that it looks is exactly my backyard. I mean, it looks. These are the woods that I grew up in. So, if anyone wants to get yeah, I mean, it's very Pacific Northwest. The trees and the pines and the feel and the moisture in the earth and like you said, very eloquently, the movie really gives you that sense of the forest and the floor in a way that I don't know if any other movie has really captured.
Right.
And it's not obvious, right? You don't have like close-ups of his hands going through dirt or something. It's just these static shots of men sitting around a campfire, and it feels authentic. I don't know if it is, but it feels real. And some of the dialogue felt a little on the nose to me at times, like the wizened old. So the main character is an itinerant logger, essentially, and we see him age through his life, and he has a tragedy early in his adult life, and he always kind of struggles with that. But yeah, beautifully shot, beautifully acted. He said Edgerton is great in pretty much everything he's in, and so yeah, I don't know. As I talk about it, I feel like I want to bump it up to a 7 now that I'm thinking about it. I just wish someone would have told me this isn't a Malick movie. This is a setup, and it's not. I think it might be a 2-hour movie if I'm not mistaken. So it's long, but it's not like absurd. That's another thing about like editing. I felt like F1 needed to be edited down. Hamnet probably should have been edited down. I don't know. Maybe Marty Supreme could have benefited from a little editing. Yeah. What other movie was I watching recently? Frankenstein. I felt like Frankenstein, the second half, if you like really condensed it. Anyway.
Oh, that I grant you.
Maybe I'm just
for sure.
Maybe I'm just dumb about that. All right, so I wanted to talk real briefly about a couple other movies that are nominated that aren't in the Best Picture category. Last night, I watched Blue Moon with Ethan Hawke. Have you seen that?
Love it. Hope he wins.
Yeah, I loved it. Yeah, I how many stars would you give it?
I would give it 4.5. I think that shit is great. I love Linklater, and I actually thought it was a Linklater we hadn't seen in years.
Yeah, I mean, I think of Tape, actually, with Ethan Hawke.
Thank you. I love Tape.
Yeah.
Oh, my God. That dialogue is perfect. I mean, I know it's based on a play, but oh, my God.
Yeah. That's where I believe Ethan and Uma Thurman met.
Yeah.
So Tape is a limited, I don't know what you call it, limited setting movie or something. Yep. The whole movie takes place in an apartment, and you have 3 actors. And with Blue Moon, it's similar in that the whole movie takes place in a lounge, a bar. And it's based on history, on Rodgers and Hart, Robert Rodgers, Hammerstein, Oklahoma, Blue Moon, the song, all that kind of stuff. And Ethan Hawke just fucking nails it.
Amazing.
And I hope he wins Best Actor for it, because it's just a classic nomination for the Oscars. It's about Hollywood in a sense. It has this historical aspect to it. It's a period piece because, it's happening in the 40s. It has this central character that has glory and also flaws, and it's tragic, and it's based on a true story that I didn't really know about until I watched this movie. And although the very first musical I was ever in was Oklahoma.
I was going to say another movie that's highly connected to a successful play. Yeah.
Yeah. And the next musical I was in was South Pacific, which was another Rodgers and Hammerstein.
Oh my God, I love it. I love it.
And I played a white guy who fell in love with an Asian Pacific Islander girl, and the Asian Pacific Islander girl was played by a white girl. So, and then I sing a song about racism against Asians, and I'm the Asian actor playing a white guy dating a white actor that's playing an Asian character.
That's really smart casting, because it shows the universality of, like, or I don't know why I flubbed that word, but the universal component to prejudice, right? And how it's basically just depending on the structure of the systems in play can turn that prejudice into weaponized racism, right? It's like that's really cool casting. I like that.
Well, it's I've never thought about that, but the reality was there were like 4 or 5 male parts, and like 7 guys tried out for those parts, so they didn't have much of a choice,
right?
And there was probably in my entire high school of I think we had like 1,200 students, 1,000 students or something. There was probably like 4 Asian students at the most. So I was probably the only Asian cast member.
So limited options, basically.
Yeah. And in terms of singing ability,
we're top tier.
I was a terrible actor, but I could sing anyway. But yeah, I love Blue Moon. I gave it an 8 out of 10, similar to your 9 out of 10. And yeah, I didn't think I would like it that much. I mean, I like Linkletter, of course, but I just thought, I don't know. I didn't know that I would like it. I think this should have been, why F1?
I know! It's very weird. It's very strange.
Other movies that are...
Did you see
Weapons? So I thought I would just kind of go through, just kind of maybe look at my list of movies. What did you think of Zootopia 2? That's nominated.
It's really fun. I hope it wins. I think it's great. I really have nothing. The only thing I will say is I just don't think animated movies care about doing good villains anymore. I've just accepted that I won't receive one. I actually think you and I, of all the movies we've talked about, this is the only one you and I have really directly texted about. Loved the protagonist. I think it does a fantastic job of expanding upon themes that were set up in the first one, and I really love it when a movie that has an existing entry both can exist very comfortably beside each other, and Zootopia is definitely emblematic of that, and I think should win for best animated feature.
Oh, I think K-pop Demon Hunter should win.
I haven't seen that. So that would be I'm biased.
Yeah. No, K-pop Demon Hunters is so fucking good.
It's high on my list.
I can't speak more highly of it. It is so. In fact, one of our listeners worked on that movie. Actually,
that's fantastic.
Everything about that movie is just perfection. In my,
I know I'm so behind.
Music is good.
That and One Battle After the Other. I'm like they're literally like this week I'm watching both. So
Yeah. Well, they're really fun movies. This isn't Train Dreams. You don't have to have patience with the Malick section. Anyway, Zootopia 2, yeah, we went back and forth about it, and I was, as always, impressed with your level of complicated detail on analysis as we were texting back and forth. But I don't know if I'm just parroting what you were saying or these are original thoughts. But to me, I love Zootopia 1. I consider these kinds of animated movies to be on the level of, non-animated movies like Frankenstein, because a lot of these animated movies have much better scripts. I don't care if it's animated or not. Like, tell me a good story and make me care about the characters and make it suspenseful. And with Zootopia 1, they nailed it, and the script is very, very good. And when you have a sequel, how do you write a sequel about a buddy cop movie where you had a really good story arc for the two characters, the cop and the criminal? And the first, Zootopia 1 is about a cop and a criminal that have to join up forces. And then it wraps up at the end where the criminal is actually praised for doing something good for the city. And then the hack way of creating a sequel is you somehow make the criminal a criminal again. But they didn't do that. But they also didn't make him a super enthusiastic cop. So there's a transition there. And so they did that well.
yes,
They also, in the Zootopia 2, they further the relationship and the crisis of these two characters. It makes me want to cry just remembering it. Is very well written out. It makes sense that the buddy cops have this falling out, halfway. There's a crisis, in their characters, in their relationship. And you're like, oh my God, are they never going to work together again? And then, as with all IP, they want to further the franchise. So they have to introduce more characters. And that is almost always handled horribly. Right. But in this movie, it's handled perfectly. I didn't even detect they were doing it until the end of the movie.
Yeah, it's subtle.
I just thought these two other characters were just, part of the story. And then I'm like, oh, they're setting up, they're broadening the main characters. They're adding these two other characters, a snake and a beaver. And those characters are fleshed out. Like, you really get a sense of who these characters are, and you care about them. They have their quirks, but the beaver in particular she's like a conspiracy theorist blogger on YouTube, and yet, endearing. And of course, the snake character you really care about because his family is on the line, and he's discriminated against. But they don't lean.
So
yeah,
you're gonna love him,
and
like you can't not.
Yeah, very funny, Dr. Jones. That guy. Anyway,
he's just precious. Yeah.
Yeah. And the political message is not heavy-handed.
It's not they just repeated the same message again in Zootopia 2. Right. It's allowing for what we've learned, hopefully thematically and based on what they're trying to say with the message in Zootopia 1, applying it to the messages in this film. It deepens your connection with the first film. And so that's a whole other level, which a lot of sequels just say, fuck it, we're not going to try.
And so I like Zootopia 2 a lot. I haven't seen Arco or Little Amelie or Elio, but I guess I plan on seeing those.
Elio's good. I don't think it's as good as Zootopia 2, but it's worth it. It's got some cool stuff in it, some cool characters.
Okay. Did you see Tron Ares?
I did, yes. And I thought it was visually very impressive. I really enjoyed the performance of the rival lady character. She's sort of like I actually, in this film, I enjoyed the villains. I thought Evan Peters was a cool tech. I just like his acting in general. And Gillian Anderson, great. I didn't care so much about the heroes in this, especially not Jared Leto, who I found completely unapproachable in the film, but I generally think that's how he comes across. but it's also the right role for that. He's basically playing
Right, that's the character. He's literally a program.
So it made sense, I'm not gonna.
Yeah.
I can't. How can I complain about that? So really, it did what it set out to do, and I like Nine Inch Nails. In terms of score, I think it's some of the most fun stuff to listen to. So it's very shallow, but it's fun.
Yeah, right. As far as a popcorn movie, I loved it. I grew up with the original Tron, watching it as a kid, and it's hard to describe how meaningful that movie was to my age bracket.
Right.
Because you have the emergence of, video games and of computer graphics and of computers, and it was just it's like if you tell people that are younger about the historical context, I can't imagine it really resonating with people. But I think I saw it maybe when I was 9 or 10 in the theaters, and it really just got under my skin. And the world of like coin-op video games and just everything, it was such a, I imagine that maybe people your age would have a similar feeling about the emergence of the internet, like the early chat rooms and this sort of thing of just like you had to be there as a teenager as that was happening. And so when the second Tron movie came out 10 years ago-ish, I was very excited, obviously, but I fucking hated it because the writing was so dumb and it didn't feel anything like Tron really to me. And I really just thought, what was going on with that script? It was so goofy. And so when the third movie comes out at Tron Ares last year, I'm thinking, well, it's probably just, and it is a sequel. They're not discarding the second movie, they're building upon it, presumably. And so I thought, but it's a Tron movie, so we'll see it. And I like Greta Lee, a lot. And so I watched it, but I was blown away. Actually, it's not a thinker of a movie, but I was along for the ride, and it has a really goofy premise that you can 3D print basically anything in the real world. That's how the programs come alive in the real world, is they 3D print themselves, and that's totally ridiculous. But that's pretty much all you need to hand wave and have some disbelief around. But the story and the characters, I just love the Greta Lee character, the storyline of it all. Even the Jared Leto character made sense to me. And yeah, the bad guys are good. And I like the fact that they kept Jeff Bridges in this really limited role, because in the second movie, Tron Legacy, I think it's called, they really leaned into the Jeff Bridges bridge, if you will. And but yeah, I really like Tron Ares, so it was a big deal to me.
You see some song in Past Lives?
Yeah, Past Lives. So Greta Lee, right? Yeah. What was the question? Did I see it?
Yeah, because I think she's phenomenal in Past Lives. I was just saying, if you haven't seen it and you're a fan, you should watch it.
No, yeah, I wouldn't be a proper Asian American if I didn't see Past Lives, and I loved that movie.
And that director had a movie out last year that got overlooked, I think, by a lot of people, with Dakota Johnson and Pedro Pascal. It was called The Materialist. So if you like, and I think it's quite good. So if you like Celine Song as a director, you should watch The Materialist. Streaming now.
Last, but maybe controversial question leading into the last movie we'll talk about. Do you like horror movies?
Less and less every year of my life. I like old horror movies. So I just watched Red Letter Media. I really love their critique, I would say, of people that only do movie reviews. I think they're the best. They, now, since Gene Siskel and Robert Ebert have passed on, they were doing Sam Raimi movies, and I just saw Send Help. So I was going through all these Sam Raimi horror-y things, loving it. Like, I rewatched Evil Dead 1, Evil Dead 2, Ash vs. the Evil Dead. I love, but you know why I love old horror movies is the kills, the gore, the whatever, there's a level of it where you go, okay, this is a theatrical. There's a theatrical quality to the gore and the kills that makes it less gross to me and more of something that you would, as a theater fan, if you like going and seeing shows, if you're a person that just loves art, the artistry of all that meant more then. Sorry, it did, because now a lot of horror movies rely so heavily on CG blood, over the top splatter that makes no sense. And so that, and also it's treated like there was such a tone deaf movie, Psycho Killer, that just came out, where movies can't decide whether or not they want to make a really cool killer that people go, wow, like he's so cool, or to make a really disturbing character that is freaky as fuck and you should be grossed out by. They want to have their cake and eat it too. And I prefer not to watch a horror film with that lack of clarity, but I find that that's more and more present. Sorry that that expanded into a monologue, but I think horror films are in utter crisis right now.
Well, on a Friday night, you're sitting down and you're just like, hey, I just want to entertain myself at the end of the day here. Would you choose to pop in a horror movie that you haven't seen before?
Sure.
That might have had some okay. So
sorry, I over extrapolated.
No. There's a lot of ways to answer that question, but I have never had that experience. I've never sat down to watch something and thought I'm going to watch a horror movie. And it's now I have watched horror movies just because sometimes I'm interested or I'm with people. But Stacy, my wife, absolutely hates horror movies to the point where she can't. When we're at the movie theater and there's a trailer for a horror film, she has to close her eyes and her ears. She hates even hearing this trailer. It kind of freaks her out on one level. I mean, she's not a scaredy cat sort of person, but she worries about having bad dreams and this kind of thing. But also, it's just not her thing. And it being with her for so many years, it has basically squelched any interest I have in horror movies. And maybe with my sort of abstinence, it makes horror movies look even less appealing to me. Now, there are movies that are quote-unquote horror that I like The Witch and Midsummer. Love those two movies a lot. I remember liking The Ring when it came out. That's pretty classic horror in my book.
Yeah, I just rewatched it. It holds up. It's good.
Yeah. As a kid, I liked Nightmare on Elm Street. I remember liking Halloween 2 for some reason. Maybe I didn't even see Halloween 1. I'm not sure. The Exorcist, I'm still traumatized by. Rosemary's Baby is, not classic horror, but I consider that to be a masterpiece of film, let alone a horror movie. So there's that. But when it comes to, just regular everyday horror movies, like, not only am I not really a fan, I fucking hate them. And I feel like I'm on an island because everyone around me, you included, Berto included, love horror movies and consider, there's a wide range, right? You have your sort of popcorn, silly ones, and then you have your serious ones, like Heredity or something like this. And when I watch those movies like Heredity, I'm just like, nope. And it doesn't scare me at all. Like I don't get nightmares or anything. It just, I can't stand actually. Cause they're like Train Dreams. The first half of the movie, it's like, oh no, this is sort of Maliki. But, I'm not like trying to claw my eyes out of my skull. It's just like I'm just bored, really. But with horror movies that I've been subjected to in the last 20 years, I'm just like, get me out of here. This story is so stupid. Like, and I've been thinking about it a lot, and I think that I think I'm inordinately focused on the writing. Everyone is, right? You included. But I feel like I even have more. Like, I don't care who the actor is. Sometimes I don't even really care who the director is. I'm more concerned about, it's almost like I can read the screenplay as I'm watching the movie in a way. And in the best movies that I enjoy, like with Blue Moon, for example, or One Battle After Another, I'm not thinking about the movie as I'm watching it. I'm lost. If it's a good movie, I'm completely lost in the story and in the movie. And at the very end, as the credits start rolling, I'm like, oh yeah, I was just watching a movie. So, with good scripts, I am transported. With bad ones, I see the shitty writing on the page. And now with horror movies, you can have well-written horror movies, but the element of it that I personally hate is that you have a supernatural power that can basically do anything, and it's completely out of the protagonist's control. So that's the premise of any good horror movie, right? Is that you have this supernatural power, like It is a classic example. You have this supernatural clown that can transport and kill and do anything and can't be killed. And the characters, the people we care about, are trying to survive, right? And to me, that is very different from other types of art or storytelling, in that usually there's a chance for the protagonist to prevail. Marty Supreme might become a nice guy, or might survive, or might win the championship. Even with Frankenstein, it's just like Frankenstein might be able to prove everyone wrong and make the creature. And Bugonia, the Jesse Plemons character, might be able to prove that she's an alien, or Emma Stone, she might be able to escape and get away from this crazy guy. Like, there isn't this supernatural god, essentially, that is slowly messing with characters for the first 90 minutes of the movie, 90% of the movie, and then at the very end shows themselves. What do you think about that idea?
I think what you've described is why so many people who write horror now lean on cliche. Whereas when something wasn't proven, so you mentioned Halloween 2, I'll talk a little bit about Halloween 1. Halloween 1 was not a proven concept. It was not like anything anyone had ever seen before. A bunch of babysitters getting axed on Halloween night. Simple premise, but completely new. So what's happened now is the Mike Myers effect is that writers can, sort of like the Force in some of the Star Wars movies that aren't written as well as the earlier ones, it becomes the ability to just do anything. So I mentioned Sam Raimi earlier. He did Evil Dead 1 and 2. There's another Evil Dead that Sam Raimi did not do, as far as I know, called Evil Dead Rise, which I did not like. Because what I found with the film was the director was basically just having things happen. They wanted to do this, so they didn't have to worry about how they got there. They just did it. So having these supernatural killers or forces, however you want to call it, it's like when the Force is written poorly. People like you and I who enjoy the writing of a film understand that we're being had, that they're falling on cliche, because there is an element to horror fans, and maybe horror fans come for me. That's fine. I am a horror fan myself, where you are sitting down for the stuff. The kills, the long hallways, the XYZ, the stuff that is expected. And in bad films, that's why you get your Scream 7s, you get your Until Dawns, you get your remake of I Know What You Did Last Summer. You get these things that are just treading the same cliches over and over, because people sit down and they expect nothing else. And so the filmmakers don't actually go the extra mile to involve the audience in this story. And they don't try to take this unmatchable force in a different direction. And what it can do actually is diminish entirely the agency of the main character, which is why you get something so rare in a movie like Weapons, where you have a series of characters who are powerless to some degree, but are using every skill that they have to try and master forces beyond their comprehension. And that's what I like in a horror movie like Weapons, which sets characters up to try things, try smart things. If I don't like the characters that are going up against the horrific forces, then generally speaking, I'm gonna say I only enjoy that horror film if I enjoyed it all for only superficial reasons. So you have a very distinct point, and that's why a lot of big budget horror is plateauing now. And if it's not plateauing, then filmmakers like you mentioned Eggers, I think we mentioned Yorgos Lanthimos earlier with Bugonia. He did a film called Killing of a Sacred Deer. Horror is sort of going into prestige category if it's not in the traditional slasher vein of disposable horror films. So it's an interesting time for horror. I think in like the 2010s, we were getting more interesting horror films like It Follows, where you were seeing things take shape because there was a drudgery effect. Not that there were only bad ones. Like I think Ring is great and came out of like the 2000s, the early aughts, but there was a stagnation effect, and that's when they were trying to revitalize these old IPs, and so we're back in the dry spell. So I really, really have a high respect for everything that you just said as a horror fan.
Interesting. Yeah, I hadn't made that connection with the Force. That is interesting. It does feel that way. Getting to Weapons, which is what I was gearing up to talk about, I think that given my disdain for that whole enterprise, I did not like Weapons. I liked the beginning. I was gripped in the beginning when we're focusing on Julia Garner and to some extent with Josh Brolin, because it's sort of like Rashomon, right? But then when we get to the drug addict guy and then others, I'm just like, okay. And then when the principal shows up with his eyes and there's vomiting of blood everywhere, and I'm just like, okay. And then when we get into the house of the people and they're stabbing themselves with forks and stuff, I'm just like, okay, yeah, this is, because everyone's, Berto and everyone, they're just like, oh, it's not a horror, it has horror elements, but it's like a really good movie. And I can't tell you how many times I've heard that. And, to their credit, they're right? But I think when I watched this movie, I finally just reckoned with, I just have some bee in my bonnet about horror elements at all. Like if there's a sniff of horror about it, it just doesn't work for me. I really wanted this movie to work for me. And I had every reason. I mean, I'm the only person I know that watched the Whitest Kids You Know. And I regularly watch their skits on YouTube. Berto isn't familiar with it. So, Zach Kreger, he's the writer-director, and he was the writer-director on The Whitest Kids You Know. And I was primed. Julia Garner is, I was introduced to her in the Americans. Everything she's in is great. So with this movie, I just realized that, there's a similar moment in my life with camping. Growing up in the Pacific Northwest, if you aren't a camper, then you must be from California or something is the thing. And I would go camping. And then at some point in my 30s or something, I just suddenly was able to come out of the closet and just admit to myself, really, that I fucking hate camping. There's nothing about camping that I enjoy. Why would I want to sleep on the ground in the woods? Like, if camping is so great, then why aren't people sleeping in their backyard every day? Why? Because it sucks to sleep in the backyard is probably better than sleeping in the middle of fucking woods, And so I realized that I just hate camping, and everyone around me loves camping. Most of the people around me in Seattle have a bumper sticker or would like to have a bumper sticker that would say, I'd rather be camping. Everyone loves fucking camping. And so I'm the weird one, and I would be scared to admit this to people once I realized about this. And the same was with horror. Like with this movie, I finally, because I struggled with Heredity. Everyone was like, "Oh, this is," or Let the Right One In, or other kind of movies in this thing. And I'd watch it and I'd be like, "Oh, I don't know." And then I wouldn't want to admit to people. And of course, I would never watch the fucking Saw movies or all the revivals of the Evil Dead stuff. It just doesn't. It just I was secretly not interested. But with Weapons, I'm like, okay, if there was ever a well-written horror-y sort of movie that that I would like, it would be this movie. And I fucking hated it. I couldn't fucking stand it about 25 minutes, when the principal is vomiting just buckets of grody coagulated blood onto his partner's face. I'm like, what the fuck? Like, that we need. And then I would hear people say that they were laughing the whole time. Like, oh, it's a comedy. That's funny to you? Like, and I'm the weird one. I get it. I'm weird. But everyone loves this movie. Everyone. I'm sure my wife would hate it.
Well, so what I liked about Weapons was the meticulous placement of events. I actually really loved that you couldn't go to the bathroom and then come back and watch it. This was a horror film that from the beginning to the end you had to actually be following. And I was intrigued by, from the word go. I loved how it actually presented a sense of narrative progression that I think is lacking in a lot of horror films. What I've found is that there's a bit of a peak. Like if I'm going off of what I usually see, the narrative will get to a climax. It'll absolutely peak, and then it will just take a nosedive off the cliff, and the climax will be crap, and you won't feel like it's earned. And I mentioned Psycho Killer. That's exactly what it is. It's just, the third act is like it was blurped out by some AI at a random moment when they realized they didn't have an ending. It's that bad. But Weapons, the ending and the insaneness of the ending, I was there authentically, and I think that's what I really enjoyed, is that it had somehow gotten me to that point, and we're watching something that bombastic and that disturbing. The fact that I arrived there and I went, yep, we're here, and this feels right, I think is what I really respected about the film. And I think those moments that you described, those over the top, like I was disturbed. And I think I appreciate a horror film more if it gets inside me and I go, ooh, like I didn't like what I just watched. And I had that multiple times when she's approaching the car, when, like you said, that guy is running, all the stuff that happens in the kitchen of Benedict Wong's character, all the stuff in the house, all the stuff with the parents when they're sitting down at the table and she's making them do that horrendous stuff. I felt so deeply for every character. And by the time it gets that poor boy who is having to take care of his parents, who are basically, spoilers, comatose because of a certain thing that happens, it got me so deeply. And I liked that with each character you meet, what you've seen before becomes that much more important. And I just loved every performance.
Yeah, literally everyone I respect as a film nerd loved this movie. So you're no exception in that regard. Yep. And, I want to be clear that gore itself, and I'm not saying this to you, I'm saying this to the audience to get out ahead of any sort of simplistic interpretation of what I'm saying. Gore is fine. Like with Kill Bill. People criticized Quentin Tarantino or Kill Bill for having all this, cartoonish blood. That doesn't bother me at all. When she's slicing up people in the Japanese scene, I'm there for that. Like it's cartoonish, it's anime-ish, it's cinematic, it's kung fu-ish, it's Quentin Tarantino-ish, and but so I'm not like grossed out by that kind of thing, but I want, but it's just that element. I can tell, and eventually it becomes true that there is a supernatural creature or force that can do things to people at will, and is currently doing those things. And the protagonists, our heroes, have no ability to change that. They just have to randomly hope that the supernatural force doesn't do it to them. And you know, I understand that this movie doesn't have it to that degree, right? And I watched, you know, the movie, but at the end of the day, it does basically tell us that story, that you have this supernatural creature that can basically do things to anyone at any point, and for whatever reason just didn't do it to certain people. It didn't, you know, those people didn't get in the crosshairs or something.
We didn't like that,
and
he had very specific ways of doing it, and that she actually did need a certain amount of, there were like steps that they showed her getting to. That's why she couldn't just do it immediately.
Yeah. But the bad things that happened to the kids, to Benedict Wong, were, you know, kind of just pretty insignificant, you know, to the supernatural creature. Again, it's not as bad as like what I'm guessing Halloween 12 was, where Mike Myers can just show up somewhere. You know, I've seen it in analyses. It's just like, wait, so are we here to believe that he got in a car and got ahead of them and then got in the closet and waited for her to open? Like,
I love how I know which one we're talking about.
Yeah, I've watched all these analyses of, you know, I'm not talking, it wasn't like that, but I guess I'm just realizing that when you have a supernatural creature, and I love that you connected it to the Force, because it's the same. Rey in Episode 9 is a supernatural god. Yep. Or Palpatine is probably a better example. Like, somehow Palpatine came back, just magic, you know, and they sort of hand wave about clones, and they don't even really tell us what, but still that's magic, right? To be able to come back. And then, you know, he can cast spells, and he can bring literally thousands of spaceships out of the sky. And and so that's a supernatural, and he can suck life force. And then she can bring people back from the dead with a kiss, or he can, and so it's all just magic shit, you know. Like in Game of Thrones, the reason why I love it so much is that the magic is very low power or mysterious, you know. Night of the Seven Kingdoms, perfect. There's basically no magic at all, you know. House of Dragon, basically no magic at all. But there is magic in the world, you know. It's subtle. It's sort of, you know, like with Bugonia, in a similar vein of just like, is he paranoid, or does he detect something? You know, there's this question, and then when you cohere it into a reality, then you're, oh well, you know, the story was gonna turn out only one way. You know, Bugonia is kind of a good example of just like, oh, okay, so the plot didn't matter, you know? Right. Like it was gonna happen, you know? You know, so with horror movies, and again, I'm like literally in the 0.1 percentile of the planet, but I just can't. So weapons is my last. I'm no longer taking, if there is horror in that, you know, genre description anywhere on the internet of a particular movie, I'm just gonna say, not for me.
You're done.
I can't. I'm never going camping again, Collin. You can't fucking make me.
I'm gonna make you love horror films, camping, and the giant Pacific octopus. That's my goal in life. All three of those things. So I'll keep fighting.
Yeah. For our listeners, we've had conversations about octopuses or octopi or octopods. Are all three acceptable? I'm not sure.
I think they're acceptable. Who cares?
Because Collin loves the ocean, loves octopi, and I am coming around, honestly, on octopuses. You know, as you would alert me to the, you know, wondrous intelligence and socialness and like abilities and personalities. And honestly, after watching Madagascar Penguins, which is one of my favorite movies, talk about a good script, which has the evil guy is an octopus.
Oh, yes.
played by John Malkovich, hilariously. Dave is his name. I've rewatched that. I watch that movie once every 3 weeks. Madagascar Penguins. It is a perfect fucking movie. It's a spy movie and action. It's fucking funny. And anyway, so I'm coming around on octopuses, but I will not come around on camping or horror movies.
Your respect for animation and animated movies preclude you from having to watch horror films. So just consider yourself excused. You're excused.
Yeah. All right. Well, it's been 3 hours of you and me yammering. If anyone is still listening, my goodness, you're either asleep or you're just as nerdy as we are about movies. And so I'm guessing you have a lot of thoughts. Comment below on YouTube, email us, or shout into the ether, or throw your phone. And I always know when that happens. I just feel it in my bones when someone is throwing their phone. You didn't like Weapons, Kirk? What the fuck? And they throw the phone or something. Or Terrence Malick is a genius. What are you talking? Whatever.
Terrence Malick stands are going to come for you in the comments. This big, huge wave.
Okay. I don't mind that because they're going to come at me so fucking slow and boring that I can run away pretty easily.
Jesus Christ. Oh, that's perfect.
Well, that does it for that episode of Psychology Seattle. Everyone out there, please take care of yourself because
you deserve it.